The engine died with a shudder that Kate Sullivan felt in her bones. She sat behind the wheel of her 15-year-old Honda, hands still gripping the leather that had worn smooth under a decade and a half of worry. 20 minutes had passed since she turned off the ignition. 20 minutes of staring at the apartment building that was no longer her home. In the passenger seat, medical bills created their own landscape of failure. $47,392. The number had stopped feeling like money weeks ago. Now it was just weight. Just gravity pulling her down into a place she couldn't climb out of. Grace stirred in the back seat. Kate could see her daughter's reflection in the rearview mirror, 8 years old with eyes that had learned to read her mother's silences. The child clutched a stuffed rabbit with one missing eye, the same rabbit Kate had sewn back together 3 times because they couldn't afford to replace it. The rabbit understood what it meant to be broken and mended and broken again. "Mom?" Grace's voice was small, careful, the voice of a child who'd learned not to ask for too much. "Are we going inside?" Kate forced her lips into something that might pass for a smile in dim light. "Just resting my eyes, honey." The lie settled between them like dust. Grace was too smart for these small deceptions, but she was also kind enough to pretend she believed them. That was the terrible gift poverty gave to children. It taught them to shoulder their parents' shame before they were old enough to understand what shame meant. The knock on the window made Kate flinch. Mr. Davis stood there, his face carrying the expression of a man who'd delivered bad news so many times it no longer touched him. He was a landlord, which meant he'd learned to calcify the part of himself that might have felt compassion. His knuckles rapped again, more insistent now. Kate rolled down the window. Cold November air rushed in, carrying the smell of coming snow and exhaust fumes and the particular scent of Pittsburgh in decline. "Kate." He didn't say Mrs. Sullivan anymore. That courtesy had disappeared with the first missed rent payment. "I've been patient, 3 months, but I need the money by Friday or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Eviction didn't require explanation. It was a fact, simple and final as gravity. "I understand," Kate heard herself say. The words came from somewhere outside her body, from the part of her that had learned to be calm while drowning. Friday. She had $482 in her checking account. Rent was $1,100. The mathematics of impossibility had become her daily bread. Mr. Davis walked away, his shoes making small wet sounds on the pavement. Kate watched him go, feeling Grace's eyes on the back of her neck. The weight of being watched by your own child while you fail them. That was a kind of pain that had no name. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Kate almost declined it. Bill collectors had started calling from randomized numbers, trying to slip past her defenses. But something made her thumb the accept button. Maybe just the desperate hope that unknown could mean different, could mean change. "Ms. Sullivan?" The voice was male, older, carrying the drawn-out vowels of the Deep South. "This is Howard Brennan. I'm an attorney calling from Rapid City, South Dakota." Kate's first thought was that this was a new tactic from the debt collectors. Pretend to be lawyers from distant states. Add gravitas to the harassment. "I'm calling about your grandmother, Rose Whitehawk." The name hit Kate like cold water. She hadn't heard it spoken aloud in more than a decade. Rose Whitehawk, her mother's mother. The woman Kate had met exactly once, for exactly 6 weeks, in a summer that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. "I'm sorry to inform you that Rose passed away on November 14th. She left instructions that you be contacted immediately." Kate's throat closed. She tried to remember Rose's face and found only fragments. Silver hair worn long, hands that knew how to coax medicine from plants, a sadness that lived in the spaces between words. "Miss Sullivan, are you there?" "Yes," her voice came out rough. "I'm here. Rose left you her entire estate, 80 acres in the foothills of the Black Hills, including a farmhouse and outbuildings. I'll need you to come to Rapid City to handle the paperwork and take possession of the property." Estate, the word sounded absurd. Kate's grandmother had lived like a hermit in the middle of nowhere, refusing every attempt at contact for 20 years. What kind of estate could she possibly have left? "The property has been maintained," the lawyer continued. "It's habitable, remote but structurally sound. Ms. Whitehawk was quite clear in her instructions. Everything goes to you. No conditions, no complications." Kate looked at the medical bills spread across the passenger seat, looked at Grace in the rearview mirror, looked at the apartment building where Mr. Davis was probably already calling the next tenant, the one who could actually pay rent. "When do I need to be there?" As soon as possible. The estate needs an executor present. And Ms. Sullivan, there's something else. The property, there's been interest from mining companies. Significant interest. You should be prepared for that. Mining companies. The word should have meant something, but Kate's mind was too full of other mathematics. 80 acres meant space. Habitable meant shelter. No rent meant the possibility of breathing without drowning. I'll leave tonight, she said. After she hung up, Grace leaned forward between the front seats. Who was that? A lawyer from South Dakota. Is it bad? Kate turned to face her daughter. Grace's thin face held so much carefully managed fear. 8 years old and already an expert in catastrophe. That was Kate's legacy to her child. The knowledge that safety was an illusion and disaster always waited just beyond the next phone call. No, baby. For once, it's not bad. My grandmother died. The one you told me about? From the reservation? She didn't live on the reservation. She lived alone on a farm, and she left it to us. Grace's eyes widened. We have a farm? We have something. I don't know what yet, but it's somewhere to go. That night, Kate packed everything they owned into the Honda. It didn't take long. 3 years of downward mobility had stripped their possessions to the essential. Clothes that still fit. Grace's schoolwork. The few books they hadn't sold. The rabbit with the missing eye. Kate left the key to the apartment in Mr. Davis's mailbox. Didn't leave a note. Didn't feel she owed him one. She'd paid what she could for as long as she could. That was all the explanation anyone deserved. They drove west through the night. Pennsylvania gave way to Ohio, gave way to Indiana. Kate stopped at rest areas to let Grace sleep properly, stretching out across the back seat with a pillow against the window. She used the bathrooms and bought coffee from vending machines and tried not to think about how far $482 would stretch. Somewhere in Iowa, with dawn turning the sky the color of old bruises, Grace woke up and climbed into the front seat. She was small enough to curl up with her knees against the dashboard, the rabbit tucked under her chin. Tell me about Grandma Rose, she said. Kate kept her eyes on the road. The story was old enough that she'd almost convinced herself it wasn't true. Just a dream from childhood, too vivid to forget, but too strange to be real. I was your age, she began. 8 years old. My mom, your Grandma Helen, she took me to South Dakota for the summer. I didn't want to go. I had friends in Philadelphia. I wanted to stay home and go to the community pool and ride my bike. But you went. Mom didn't give me a choice. She packed my suitcase and put me on a bus and told me I was spending 6 weeks with her mother, a woman I'd never met, a woman who lived alone in the middle of nowhere and didn't have a telephone. The memory came back in pieces. The long bus ride, the landscape flattening and emptying, the strange man who picked her up at the station, a Lakota elder who didn't speak the entire 30-mile drive to Rose's farmhouse. What was it like? Beautiful. Terrible. Both. Kate glanced at Grace, trying to find words for what that summer had meant. Rose lived in this old wooden farmhouse at the edge of the Black Hills. She had a garden full of plants I'd never seen before. Medicinal herbs, she said. She taught me their names in Lakota. I can't remember them anymore, but I remember how her hands looked when she showed me, like they knew secrets the rest of the world had forgotten. Did she love you? The question was so direct it hurt. I think so, in her way. But there was something sad about her, Grace, something broken. She'd look at me sometimes like she was seeing a ghost. And at night I'd hear her crying, just these small sounds coming from her bedroom, like she was trying not to be heard. Grace was quiet for a while, watching the fields roll past. Then, why did you only visit once? Mom came to pick me up after 6 weeks, and they had a fight. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but I was sitting on the porch and their voices carried through the window. Kate could still hear it. The anger in her mother's voice, the quiet devastation in Rose's. Mom said, you chose this land over your own daughter, over us. And Rose said, I didn't choose the land. I chose to protect what's buried here. What was buried there? I don't know. Mom wouldn't talk about it. She took me back to Philadelphia and we never went to South Dakota again. When I asked about Rose, Mom would just say, she made her choice. Like that explained everything. The Honda's engine made a sound that suggested it was considering retirement. Kate eased off the accelerator, coaxing the vehicle forward with gentle pressure and prayer. They couldn't afford a breakdown, couldn't afford anything really except forward motion and the hope that South Dakota held something better than what they'd left behind. They crossed into South Dakota as the sun reached its apex. The landscape changed in ways that felt more emotional than geographic. The sky opened up, became bigger somehow, pressing down with a weight that was both oppressive and liberating. Kate remembered this feeling from childhood. The sense that there was too much space here, too much emptiness, and that you could either let it crush you or let it teach you to become vast yourself. Look, Mom, Grace pointed at a road sign. Wall drug, what's that? A tourist trap, but we'll stop if you want. They didn't stop. Kate didn't have money for tourist traps or souvenirs, or the small pleasures that made road trips bearable. She had gas money and enough for one more night in a cheap motel if they didn't make it to the farmhouse before dark. That was the extent of her wealth. By late afternoon, they reached the Black Hills. The landscape rose around them, not mountains, but their promise. Hills that suggested elevation without fully committing to it. Pine trees appeared, dark and clustered. The air smelled different here, cleaner, like the world had been rinsed and hung out to dry. Kate followed the directions the lawyer had emailed. Turn off the highway at mile marker 43, follow the gravel road for 8 miles. Look for the mailbox with Whitehawk painted on the side. The gravel road was worse than she'd expected. The Honda bottomed out twice, scraping its undercarriage with sounds that made Kate wince. They passed exactly 2 other properties in 8 miles. Both looked abandoned, houses with broken windows and yards full of rusted equipment slowly being reclaimed by prairie grass. Then the mailbox appeared. Whitehawk. The letters were faded but still legible, painted in a careful hand that suggested pride in small things. Kate turned into the driveway and immediately understood why Rose had stayed for 40 years. The farmhouse sat at the base of a long rise, backed by pine-covered hills that caught the afternoon light and turned it golden. It was built from wood that had weathered to the color of bone, 2 stories with a wraparound porch and a metal roof that showed patches of rust but no major damage. The windows were intact. The structure stood straight and true, not leaning or sagging the way abandoned buildings did. To the left of the house stood a barn, its roof partially collapsed but its frame still strong. To the right, a smaller building that might have been a chicken coop once, though no chickens had lived there in years. And beyond that, strangest of all, a cylindrical metal structure that looked like a grain silo but was too large, too modern, too deliberately maintained for a farm this size. Kate pulled up to the house and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was profound. No traffic sounds, no sirens, no neighbors' televisions bleeding through thin walls, just wind moving through pine trees and the tick-tick-tick of the Honda's engine cooling. Is this it? Grace's voice was hushed, almost reverent. This is it. They got out of the car. Kate's legs were stiff from 23 hours of driving, with only brief stops for gas and bathrooms, and the kind of sleep that wasn't really sleep, just unconsciousness stolen in parking lots. She stretched, feeling her spine crack and resettle. Grace walked toward the house like she was approaching something sacred, or dangerous, maybe both. The porch steps were solid under Kate's weight. Someone had maintained them, replaced boards where needed, kept the structure sound. Rose, probably working alone into her 80s to keep her sanctuary from collapsing into ruin. Kate tried the front door, unlocked. It swung open with a sound like an exhale, and they stepped into Rose Whitehawk's 40 years of solitude. The interior was dim, curtains drawn against the afternoon sun. But even in the half-light, Kate could see that the house was furnished, lived in, maintained. A sofa with faded upholstery, a rocking chair positioned near the window, bookshelves lined with volumes in English and what Kate assumed was Lakota. A wood stove in the corner, cold now but surrounded by neatly stacked firewood. And in the center of the room, a dining table set for 3. Kate stopped, her breath catching. 3 place settings, 3 plates, 3 glasses, 3 sets of silverware arranged with careful precision. 1 setting for an adult, 1 for a smaller adult, 1 for a child. Mom, Grace whispered, someone's been here. The calendar on the wall showed November 2024. Someone had circled the 14th in red ink. The day Rose died. Beneath the circled date and handwriting that Kate recognized from childhood, thank you cards and birthday greetings that had arrived sporadically until she was 12, someone had written, "They will come for you. Don't trust the first offer." Kate's skin prickled. Grace, stay close to me. She moved through the house quickly, checking rooms. Upstairs, 2 bedrooms. One clearly Rose's, with a narrow bed and a dresser topped with photographs in cheap frames. The other empty, except for a twin bed and a small desk. Waiting. The bathroom had running water, though Kate wasn't sure from where. Solar panels on the roof, maybe. Rose had always been resourceful. Downstairs again, Kate examined the dining table more carefully. The dust on the windowsills and bookshelves suggested weeks of abandonment, but the table was clean. The plates were clean. Someone had set this table recently, within the last few days. A sound outside made them both freeze. An engine, getting closer. Kate moved to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see. A pickup truck was coming up the driveway, old but well-maintained, painted a blue that had faded to something softer over years of sun exposure. The truck stopped next to Kate's Honda. A man got out, tall, broad-shouldered, despite what must have been 70 years of life. Silver hair cut short, face weathered by decades of sun and wind. He wore jeans and a flannel shirt and work boots, and he carried a thermos in one hand and what looked like a casserole dish in the other. He walked to the porch and knocked. 3 firm raps that said he knew someone was inside. Kate opened the door, but kept her body blocking the entrance. Grace pressed against her back, small and warm and frightened. The man's face broke into a smile that seemed genuine. "Ms. Sullivan, I'm Frank Garrison. I live about 5 miles east of here. I wanted to, well, I brought coffee and some food. Rose used to make me stew when my Betty was sick. Figured I'd return the favor." Kate studied him, trying to read threat or safety in the lines of his face. He had kind eyes, but she'd been fooled by kind eyes before. "How did you know I'd be here today?" "I didn't. I've been checking every day since Rose passed. Figured her granddaughter would come eventually." He held up the thermos. "Coffee's getting cold, and this chicken casserole won't reheat well. May I come in, or if you're not comfortable with that, we can sit on the porch." Something in his manner made Kate step back and open the door wider. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was the fact that he'd brought food, and Grace hadn't eaten a proper meal since the McDonald's they'd split in Iowa. Maybe it was just the desperate hope that kindness might be real. Frank Garrison stepped inside and set the thermos and casserole on the dining table. He noticed the 3 place settings and something flickered across his face. Recognition and sadness. "She knew you'd come," he said quietly. "She set this table 3 days before she died." Kate felt the words like a physical thing. How? Rose had a way of knowing things. "My Betty used to say she could read the wind." Frank opened the casserole dish. Steam rose, carrying the smell of chicken and vegetables and the kind of cooking that suggested someone cared whether you were fed. "You hungry, both of you?" Grace's stomach answered with a growl that would have been funny under different circumstances. They ate at Rose's table, using Rose's plates, and Frank Garrison talked. He talked like a man who'd been holding stories for too long and finally had someone to tell them to. He'd lived in the area for 40 years, he said. Came in 1984, same time Rose bought the property. He'd worked at the Homestake gold mine until it closed in 2002, the mine that had made Deadwood famous and then slowly killed it when the gold ran out. His wife Betty was Lakota from the Rosebud Reservation, a woman who understood what it meant to live between worlds. Betty and Rose were friends, Frank said, pouring coffee from the thermos into the glasses that had been set out. Not close, exactly. Rose didn't let people get close, but they understood each other. Both women who'd made hard choices and had to live with them. "What choices?" Kate heard herself ask. Frank looked at her for a long moment, weighing something. "That's a story that needs telling, but maybe not on an empty stomach and after 20-some hours of driving. How about we get you settled first? There's food in the fridge, believe it or not. I've been keeping it stocked, and the solar panels work fine. You'll have electricity, water from the well. This place is livable." "Why, ma'am?" Kate set down her fork. "Why would you do all this for someone you don't know?" "Because Rose asked me to." Frank's voice was simple, stating a fact. 3 weeks before she died, she called me over. Told me her time was coming. Asked me to watch over the place until you arrived. Asked me to make sure you knew you weren't alone. He smiled slightly. Also, she paid me $3,000 cash. So technically, I'm doing this for money. But mostly I'm doing it because I owed Rose Whitehawk more than I could ever repay. Grace had fallen asleep in her chair, head pillowed on her arms. The casserole dish was nearly empty. Kate felt the exhaustion pulling at her, too. But there were too many questions, too many pieces that didn't fit. "Frank, what's buried here?" His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "You mean the uranium?" The word hung in the air between them like smoke. "There's a deposit," Frank continued. "Big one. Rose had it tested back in 1985. With today's prices, probably worth $300–400 million. maybe more with the right equipment and permits. Kate's coffee cup stopped halfway to her lips. 400 million, give or take. Frank leaned back in his chair. And there are people who know about it, companies who've been trying to buy this land for 40 years. Rose refused every offer, every threat, every attempt at pressure. She stood guard over this deposit like it was the last thing standing between the world and hell. Why? Because people died for it once, and Rose swore they wouldn't die for it again. Frank stood, collecting the empty casserole dish. I should let you rest. But Ms. Sullivan, Kate, you need to understand something. You're going to get visitors, probably soon. Men in expensive suits offering you money, a lot of money, and they're going to be very persuasive. The note said don't trust the first offer. Don't trust any of them. Not until you know the whole story. Frank moved toward the door, then paused. There's a storm cellar out back, behind the chicken coop. It's locked with a digital keypad. The code is 071452. What's in there? Everything you need to know. Everything Rose spent 40 years documenting. Frank opened the door, late afternoon light spilling across the threshold. Get some sleep first. The truth will still be there tomorrow. And Kate, I'll be back in the morning. I'll help you with whatever you need. You're not alone in this. He left, his truck rumbling back down the gravel road until the sound faded into wind and silence. Kate carried Grace upstairs to the smaller bedroom, the one that had been waiting. She tucked her daughter into the narrow bed, pulling a quilt over her that smelled of cedar and thyme. Grace barely stirred, already deep in the exhausted sleep of children who'd been brave for too long. Alone in Rose's house, Kate walked through rooms that held a stranger's life. She studied the photographs on the dresser. Rose as a young woman, beautiful and fierce, standing with a man Kate didn't recognize. Lakota, handsome, with eyes that held sorrow and strength in equal measure. Other photos showed the farmhouse in earlier years, when the paint was fresh and the barn roof was whole. On Rose's nightstand, Kate found a journal. She opened it to the last entry, dated November 13th, 2024, the day before Rose died. The handwriting was shaky but legible. She's coming. I can feel it in my bones, the same way I felt the winter coming when I was young. Kate is coming, and with her, Grace. The child's name is Grace. Helen told me that much before she died, her last gift to me, a name and a photograph. Kate's hand trembled as she turned the page. There was more. I've done what I could. The evidence is safe. The land is protected, as well as one old woman could protect it. But the real guardianship passes to Kate now. She'll have to choose, just as I chose. And I pray she's stronger than I was, braver. I pray she doesn't waste 40 years learning what I could have taught her in 6 weeks if I'd had the courage to speak plainly. The entry ended there. Rose had died the next day. Kate closed the journal and sat on the edge of Rose's bed, feeling the weight of inheritance settling on her shoulders. Not just land, not just a farmhouse and 80 acres and a uranium deposit worth hundreds of millions, but choice, burden, legacy. Outside, the sun was setting, turning the black hills into silhouettes against a sky the color of old gold. Kate watched through the window as darkness gathered in the valleys and crept up the hillsides, patient and inevitable. Somewhere in that darkness was a storm cellar holding 40 years of secrets. Somewhere in that darkness was the truth about what Rose had guarded and why people had died and what Kate was supposed to do with knowledge she hadn't asked for. But tonight, Kate was too tired for truth. Tonight, she had a roof that didn't leak and a bed that was clean and a daughter sleeping safely upstairs. That was enough. That had to be enough. She lay down on Rose's bed, still dressed, too exhausted to search for pajamas or worry about tomorrow. The mattress held the shape of an old woman's body, a hollow worn by decades of solitary sleep. Kate fit into that hollow like she'd been meant for it, like Rose had left her an inheritance that was more than property. Sleep came fast and deep, pulling her down into dreams of silver hair and hands that knew how to coax medicine from plants and a sadness that lived in the spaces between words. When Kate woke, dawn was breaking and headlights were coming up the driveway. 3 vehicles this time. Black SUVs with tinted windows in the kind of aggressive shine that spoke of corporate wealth. They parked in a semicircle facing the house, their engines idling, headlights cutting through the morning mist like searchlights. Kate went to the window. A man stepped out of the center vehicle, mid-50s, Gray suit that probably cost more than Kate's car, hair silver at the temples in a way that suggested distinguished rather than old. He stood looking at the farmhouse with an expression Kate couldn't read. Not threatening? Not exactly, but purposeful. Intent. Grace appeared beside her, still in yesterday's clothes, her rabbit clutched tight. Who's that? I don't know. Kate's voice was steadier than she felt. But I think Rose knew he'd come. The man walked toward the porch alone, leaving his security detail by the vehicles. He climbed the steps and knocked. Not aggressive, patient. The knock of someone who knew how to wait. Kate opened the door. Up close, she could see that the man's eyes were tired, deeply tired, in a way that sleep couldn't fix. He smiled, but it didn't reach those eyes. Miss Sullivan, my name is James Donovan. I'm the CEO of Apex Resources. I was hoping we could talk about your grandmother's property. I have a proposition that I think will be very much in your interest. Behind him, the sun was rising over the Black Hills, turning the sky to fire. And in that moment, Kate understood that Rose had been right. They had come for her. The choice had arrived with the dawn. And whatever happened next would echo for generations, the way choices always did when land and money and blood mixed together in the soil. Kate looked at the man's tired eyes, at the SUVs waiting like patient predators, at Grace pressed against her side. She thought of Rose setting a table for three. She thought of the storm cellar and the secrets it held. She thought of Frank Garrison's warning and the journal entry that spoke of courage Rose had lacked. All right, Mr. Donovan, she said, let's talk. She stepped back, opening the door wider, inviting the future in. James Donovan refused the chair Kate offered. He stood in Rose Whitehawk's living room with the bearing of a man who'd learned that sitting made difficult conversations harder to escape. The morning light came through the eastern windows at an angle that turned dust motes into falling stars. And in that light, Kate could see the lines carved deep around his mouth, the shadows under his eyes that spoke of nights without sleep. I appreciate you seeing me without notice, he said. His voice carried the careful neutrality of someone who'd spent decades negotiating. I know this must be overwhelming. Inheriting property you didn't know existed in a place you haven't visited in years. Kate positioned herself between Donovan and Grace, who'd retreated to the corner near the wood stove, rabbit clutched tight. Frank Garrison said people would come with offers. Frank's a good man, smart man. Donovan's smile was brief, almost sad. I'm not going to insult your intelligence with small talk, Ms. Sullivan. You're a mining engineer, Colorado School of Mines. Graduated top 15% of your class. 3 years at Black Diamond Coal before they let you go for refusing to sign off on a safety report you knew was falsified. Kate's spine stiffened. You investigated me. I investigate everyone involved in properties my company is interested in. It's not personal. It's necessary. He moved toward the window, looking out at the hills that rolled away toward the horizon. You know what's under this ground? If you didn't before, Frank's told you by now. Uranium, high grade, extensive deposit, worth somewhere between $300 and $400 million at current market prices. Grace made a small sound. Kate didn't need to look to know her daughter's eyes had gone wide. 400 million was a number too large to mean anything real to an 8-year-old. Hell, it was too large to mean anything real to Kate. My grandfather discovered this deposit in 1952, Donovan continued. He was working with the Atomic Energy Commission, surveying this region for strategic minerals. Cold War was heating up. Government needed uranium for weapons, for power plants, for the future they were building, whether anyone wanted it or not. The land belonged to the Lakota, Kate said. Not a question. Yes. The word came out flat, emotionless. Specifically, it was part of a larger parcel that had been in Lakota possession since the Treaty of 1868, which the government violated repeatedly. But that's American history for you. By 1952, this particular section had passed through several hands, legal and otherwise. My grandfather convinced the Atomic Energy Commission that acquiring it was a matter of national security. Kate waited. There was more coming. She could feel it in the careful way Donovan chose his words, in the tension held in his shoulders despite his relaxed stance. There were 18 people who opposed the sale, led by a man named Thomas Whitehawk. Your great-uncle, I believe, Rose's brother. Donovan turned from the window to face her. They organized, made their case that the land was sacred, that disturbing it would violate treaties still technically in force, that the government couldn't simply take what it wanted because it wanted it. What happened to them? They died. 2 words delivered with the precision of a man who'd said them before, who'd practiced saying them until the horror became just information. There was a feast, a gathering to discuss the uranium issue. All 18 attendees became violently ill within hours. Official reports said food poisoning, bacterial contamination in the venison that was served. Kate's stomach turned, but it wasn't food poisoning. No. Donovan's eyes met hers, and in them Kate saw something she hadn't expected. Shame, deep and old and carried like a sobbing in the chest. It was arsenic, mixed into the food deliberately. And more than that, though this wasn't discovered until much later, the food had been dusted with uranium oxide, radiation poisoning on top of arsenic. Whoever planned it wanted to make sure the deaths looked natural, spread out over time, multiple causes that would confuse any investigation. Your grandfather, my grandfather. The confirmation came quiet, almost inaudible. Richard Donovan. He orchestrated the murders with the tacit approval of government officials who wanted the uranium and didn't care how they got it. The 18 people died over the course of 6 weeks, some quickly from the arsenic, others slowly from the radiation, all of them suffering, all of them knowing they'd been murdered but unable to prove it. Grace had started to cry, soft sounds that she was trying to muffle against the rabbit's synthetic fur. Kate wanted to go to her, to hold her, but she couldn't move, couldn't look away from James Donovan's face. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve the truth. Because my grandfather committed genocide for profit, and that's a fact I can't change by pretending it didn't happen. Donovan reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. This is my offer, $5 million for the land, but not to mine it. Kate's breath caught. What? I want to buy the property to seal it, permanently. I'll deed it to the Lakota Nation with a conservation easement that prohibits all mining in perpetuity. No extraction, no development. The uranium stays in the ground where it belongs. The envelope felt heavy when Kate took it. Inside were legal documents, dense with language she'd need a lawyer to parse. But the number was clear enough. $5 million. More money than she'd see in 10 lifetimes of engineering work. If she could even get engineering work again, with her reputation for being difficult about safety. Your grandmother spent 40 years standing guard over this land, Donovan said, making sure my family's crime didn't compound into more death, more destruction. I want to build a monument, a real one. Names of the 18 victims, explanation of what happened, a place where people can come and remember that justice delayed is still justice denied. That's very noble. Kate's voice came out harder than she intended. But it doesn't bring them back. No, nothing brings them back. Donovan's composure cracked just slightly. Ms. Sullivan, I'm not asking you to forgive my family. I'm asking you to let me end this. To let me do what my father never had the courage to do. Acknowledge the crime. Make what amends are possible. And ensure that the land those 18 people died protecting stays protected. Kate looked at the documents. $5 million. Grace's medical bills would disappear like they'd never existed. College fund, house, security. The kind of future Kate had stopped letting herself imagine because imagining hurt too much when reality kept proving it impossible. There's something else. Donovan pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, showed her a photograph. A girl, maybe 16, with dark hair and her father's tired eyes. She was sitting in a hospital bed, oxygen tube in her nose, smiling despite obvious exhaustion. My daughter, Caroline, she has cystic fibrosis. We've been in and out of hospitals her entire life. I know what it's like to watch your child suffer, to feel helpless against illness you can't control or cure. Kate's throat tightened. She thought of Grace's asthma attacks, the terror of watching her daughter struggle to breathe, the guilt of not being able to afford the medications that might have prevented the worst episodes. I'm not trying to manipulate you, Donovan said quietly. I'm trying to connect. Parent to parent. Your daughter deserves better than this. He gestured at the farmhouse, at the remote location, at the poverty that clung to Kate like a second skin. Take the money, give Grace the life your grandmother couldn't give your mother. Break the cycle. Before Kate could respond, Grace spoke. Her voice was small but clear, cutting through the tension like a blade. What about the other families, the people who died in 1952? Donovan turned to look at her, and something in his expression softened. He knelt, bringing himself to Grace's eye level, with the careful respect some adults manage to show children, and most didn't. You're right, he said. The money should go to them. How about this? 2 million to you and your mother, 3 million to the descendants of the 18 victims. I'll hire genealogists to track them down, to make sure every family gets their share. Grace considered this, her small face serious. Will you say you're sorry? Not just pay money, but say the words? Yes. Donovan's voice was thick. I'll say I'm sorry. I'll say it as many times as they need to hear it, though I don't think sorry is a word big enough for what my grandfather did. Frank Garrison's truck rumbled up the driveway, dust rising in its wake. He parked behind the black SUVs and climbed out, moving with the deliberate purpose of a man who decided something needed doing. He crossed the yard and climbed the porch steps without knocking, coming through the door like he had every right to be there. Donovan! Frank's greeting held no warmth. Didn't waste any time, did you? Frank, still appointed yourself guardian of every lost cause in the county? Just the ones that matter. Frank positioned himself next to Kate, a silent statement of allegiance. What's he offering? 5 million to seal the land. Frank whistled low. That's a hell of a lot more than the 2 million he offered Rose last year. Inflation hitting the guild industry that hard? Donovan's jaw tightened. I'm trying to do the right thing here. The right thing would have been your father doing this 30 years ago, or your grandfather not murdering 18 people in the first place. But we don't get to choose our timing, do we? We just get to live with the consequences of other people's choices and pretend our belated conscience makes up for their crimes. The two men stared at each other, decades of some unspoken history crackling in the space between them. Kate filed it away to ask Frank about later. Right now, she needed to think, needed to understand what she was really being offered. Mr. Donovan, she said carefully, if you seal the land, how does your company benefit? Seems like you'd make more money mining it. We would, significantly more. But my company already has extraction rights to 4 other uranium deposits in Wyoming and Montana. If this one stays sealed, those others become more valuable. Supply and demand. Donovan's honesty was either refreshing or calculated. Kate couldn't tell which. I'm not a saint, Miss Sullivan. I'm a businessman who's trying to balance profit with not adding to my grandfather's body count. So it's good PR and good business. Yes, and it's also the right thing to do. Those 3 facts don't cancel each other out. Kate looked at Grace, who'd stopped crying but was watching the adults with the intensity children developed when they knew important things were being decided around them. She looked at Frank, whose weathered face showed skepticism that came from experience. She looked at James Donovan, whose tired eyes suggested he was telling the truth, or at least the truth as he understood it. I need time, she said. This is too big to decide in one morning. Of course. Donovan nodded, already moving toward the door. Take a week, 2 weeks, however long you need. But Ms. Sullivan, there's something you should know. Other companies are aware of this deposit. If you reject my offer, you'll get others. And they won't care about monuments or acknowledging the past. They'll just want the uranium. Some of them will play dirtier than I'm willing to. Is that a threat? It's a warning from someone who knows this industry. Donovan paused at the threshold. My cell number is on the contract. Call any time, day or night. And Ms. Sullivan, whatever you decide, I hope you'll let me help with Grace's medical care. That check for the genealogist, I can cut one for you too. $25,000 for her treatment. No strings attached, one parent to another. He left before Kate could respond, his SUVs pulling away in formation, leaving only dust and the memory of his offer hanging in the air. Frank moved to the stove, began building a fire with the efficiency of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. He means it, he said without looking at Kate. About the medical money. Donovan's a lot of things, but he's not cruel. His daughter really does have CF. He knows what it costs, both in money and in watching someone you love struggle to breathe. How do you know so much about him? Because I've been watching the Donovan family for 40 years. Same as Rose. Frank got the fire going, flame catching on kindling and growing. Did he tell you his whole story about why he's so eager to make amends? He said his grandfather committed genocide. Did he tell you about his wife, Rebecca? Frank settled into Rose's rocking chair, the wood creaking under his weight. She died 5 years ago, ovarian cancer. Before she passed, she came to see Rose. Drove all the way from Denver by herself, told her husband she was going to a spa. Kate sat on the sofa, Grace climbing up beside her. The fire was starting to warm the room, chasing away the morning chill. Rebecca told Rose something James doesn't know. Something that's going to break him when he finds out. Frank's voice was quiet, almost gentle. Caroline's cystic fibrosis. It's caused by a genetic mutation, very specific type. And that mutation, according to Rebecca's research, is linked to radiation exposure in previous generations. The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading outward. James's grandmother was Lakota, Frank continued. She was pregnant in 1952, which is why she didn't attend the feast. Missed the arsenic, missed the uranium dust. But she was exposed to lower levels of radiation from being around the contaminated site in the weeks after. That exposure damaged her DNA, passed down through James's father, then to James, then to Caroline. Oh God, Kate breathed. Rebecca gave Rose the genetic test results, proof that the radiation damage from 1952 is still hurting people. Caroline is a victim of her great-great-grandfather's crime. The irony would be funny if it wasn't so goddamn tragic. Frank rocked slowly, the chair keeping rhythm with his words. Rebecca made Rose promise not to tell James. She thought it would destroy him, knowing that his family's guilt was literally written into his daughter's DNA. Does he suspect? I don't know, but he will eventually. CF with that specific mutation is rare enough that someone will make the connection. Some researcher studying radiation effects. Some doctor putting together family history and genetic markers. Truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep you bury it. Kate held Grace tighter. Her daughter had gone very still, processing information that no 8-year-old should have to carry. But poverty had already taught Grace to bear adult burdens. This was just one more weight added to a child's shoulders. The morning stretched into afternoon. Frank made them lunch from the supplies he'd stocked in Rose's kitchen. Soup from a can, bread that was slightly stale but still edible, apples that were past their prime but sweet enough. They ate in silence, each lost in their own calculations. Kate's mind kept circling back to the number. $5 million. $2 million after dividing it with the victims' families, but still. $2 million would change everything. Grace could see specialists, real ones, not the rotating cast of overwhelmed doctors at free clinics. They could live somewhere stable. Kate could go back to school, finish her doctorate, teach instead of working 3 jobs that barely covered rent. But, always but, if she took Donovan's money, she was accepting his version of justice. Monument and acknowledgement in sealed land. Noble enough on the surface. But was it what Thomas Whitehawk would have wanted? Was it what Rose had spent 40 years protecting? As the sun climbed toward its apex, Grace's breathing changed. Kate heard it before she saw it. That subtle catch that preceded the wheeze. She was on her feet instantly, moving to her daughter, hand on Grace's chest, feeling the rapid flutter of a heart working too hard. "Baby, where's your inhaler?" Grace's eyes were wide, starting to panic. Panic made it worse, made the airways constrict tighter. "Car," she managed. "Glove box." Kate ran, out the door, across the porch, to the Honda that had carried them across half a continent. The glove box jammed. She yanked harder, plastic creaking, and finally it gave. The inhaler was there, blue and white, and holding the medication that might save her daughter from suffocating on her own inflammation. Back inside, Grace was standing now, hands braced on her knees. Frank behind her coaching her to stay calm, stay focused, breathe slow. Kate shook the inhaler, pressed it to Grace's lips, depressed the canister once, twice. Grace inhaled as deep as she could, held it, released. They waited. The seconds stretched like taffy. Grace's breathing steadied. The panic faded from her eyes. Color returned to her cheeks. "Better?" Kate's voice shook. Grace nodded, but Kate could see the exhaustion settling over her. The attack had been mild, manageable with the inhaler. But they were getting more frequent, and mild attacks had a way of escalating when you couldn't afford the daily preventive medications that kept the inflammation under control. "She needs to see a specialist," Frank said what Kate already knew. "Santa Fe has a pediatric pulmonologist. Dr. Morrison, he's expensive, but he's good." "How expensive?" $250 for the initial consultation. Tests would be extra. If he prescribes new medications, those could run $300-400 a month depending on what he recommends. Kate did the math. She had $482 in her account. Enough for one consultation if they drove to Santa Fe and slept in the car instead of getting a hotel. Not enough for tests. Definitely not enough for ongoing medications. Donovan's offer sat on the dining table where Kate had left it. $25,000. No strings attached. Just one parent understanding another parent's desperation. Grace fell asleep on the sofa, covered with the quilt Kate had brought from the bedroom. Frank sat with her while Kate went outside, needing air, needing space to think without her daughter's labored breathing filling her ears. The Black Hills rose around her, ancient and indifferent. They'd been here long before white men found uranium beneath them. They'd be here long after the current crisis passed into history. Kate envied them their permanence, their inability to worry about anything as temporary as human suffering. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She almost declined it, but something made her answer. Ms. Sullivan? A man's voice, older with the careful enunciation of someone for whom English was a learned language. My name is Joseph Whitehawk. I'm Rose's brother, your great-uncle. Kate's breath caught. I didn't know you were still alive. Barely. I'm 71 and I've got diabetes that's slowly killing me. But I'm alive enough to make this call. There was a pause, the sound of breath drawn and released. Rose wrote me before she died, told me you'd inherit the land, told me you'd need guidance. Where are you? Pine Ridge Reservation, about 90 miles from where you're standing. Can you come see me? Tomorrow, if possible. There are things you need to know before you make any decisions about that land. Things Rose documented but never fully explained. Kate looked back into the farmhouse, at Grace sleeping inside, at the life she'd built from desperation and determination, and was now being asked to transform with a single decision. I'll come tomorrow. Good. Ask for Joseph Whitehawk at the Tribal Council building. Someone will find me. He paused again. Kate, I know James Donovan came to see you this morning. I know what he offered. Don't accept it. Not yet. Not until you know everything. How did you know he came? Because he always comes. He came to Rose every year for the last decade. Same offer, increasing amounts. She always refused, not because the money was wrong, but because the timing was wrong. Joseph's voice carried weight Kate couldn't quite identify. Some debts can only be paid in the currency of truth, and that's a currency the Donovan family has never been willing to spend. He hung up before Kate could ask what he meant. That night, Grace's asthma flared again. Worse this time. The inhaler helped but didn't fully resolve it. Kate sat up with her daughter through the small hours, listening to each breath, counting the spaces between them, praying to a God she'd stopped believing in, that this wouldn't be the attack that finally overwhelmed Grace's small lungs. By 4 in the morning, it was clear they needed help. Real help. Kate carried Grace to the car, Frank following with blankets and water. They drove through darkness toward the nearest hospital, 40 miles of gravel and paved road, while Grace struggled to breathe in the back seat. The ER at Rapid City Regional was quiet at that hour. They took Grace immediately, her oxygen saturation low enough to trigger alarms. Nebulizer treatment, IV steroids, monitoring that required staying overnight. Kate sat in a plastic chair next to Grace's bed, watching monitors display her daughter's vital signs in green and red numbers. Frank had stayed in the waiting room, respecting the privacy of mother and child, but close enough to help if needed. Somewhere around 6 a.m., a doctor came in. Indian American, name tag reading Dr. Patel. She examined Grace with gentle efficiency, asked questions about the history of her asthma, made notes on a tablet. She's stable now, Dr. Patel said, but I'm concerned about the scarring I see in her lungs. How long has her asthma been this severe? 3 years, since she was 5. Kate's voice was hollow. She knew what was coming. Is she on a daily controller medication? She was. When we had insurance, I lost my job and the coverage lapsed. We've been managing with just the rescue inhaler. Dr. Patel's expression didn't change, but Kate saw the judgment anyway, or maybe it wasn't judgment. Maybe it was just pity, which was worse. Ms. Sullivan, Grace needs specialist care. There's a pediatric pulmonologist in Rapid City, Dr. Morrison. He's excellent with severe asthma cases. I'd like to refer you. How much would that cost? The doctor's hesitation told Kate everything. The initial consultation is around $250. Tests and imaging could run another $500 to $800. If Dr. Morrison prescribes biologics, which Grace might need given her severity, those can cost up to $1,000 a month, even with insurance assistance programs. Kate nodded like this information wasn't destroying her, like she hadn't already done this math 100 times and come up with the same impossible numbers. Dr. Patel touched Kate's shoulder, brief and kind. There are assistance programs. Let me have the social worker come talk to you. After the doctor left, Kate sat in the dimness, listening to the hiss of oxygen flowing into Grace's nose. Her daughter slept the drug sleep of steroids and exhaustion, finally able to breathe without fighting for it. Kate's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. Ms. Sullivan, this is James Donovan. Frank called me about Grace. I'm having a check for $25,000 couriered to the hospital. Should arrive this morning. Please use it for her care. This is not contingent on any land deal. Just help for a child who needs it. Kate stared at the message until the words blurred. Donovan was either the most genuinely compassionate person she'd ever encountered, or the most skilled manipulator. Probably both. The world was complicated enough to allow for both truths simultaneously. She typed back, "Thank you, I don't know what else to say." His response came immediately. "You don't have to say anything, just let me help." The courier arrived at 8 a.m. with an envelope containing a cashier's check made out to Kate Sullivan for $25,000. She held it in hands that trembled. This piece of paper that could change everything. That came from a man whose grandfather had murdered for the minerals under her inherited land. Frank came in carrying coffee and a breakfast sandwich from the hospital cafeteria. He took one look at Kate's face and the check in her hands and sat down heavily. He actually did it. He actually did it. Kate set the check on the rolling table next to Grace's bed. "Frank, what am I supposed to do? How do I take this money and still maintain any kind of moral high ground?" "You don't." Frank's bluntness was almost comforting. "There is no moral high ground here, Kate. There's just a bunch of people trying to do less harm than their ancestors did. And sometimes that means accepting help from the children of monsters." "Is he a monster?" "James, no. He's a man carrying his grandfather's guilt like a cross and trying to find somewhere to lay it down. His daughter is sick. Your daughter is sick. In that moment, you're not the CEO of a mining company and the heir to a uranium deposit. You're just two parents who do anything to make their children's suffering stop." Kate looked at Grace, at the oxygen tube, at the monitors measuring each breath. She thought about Joseph Whitehawk's warning, about Rose's 40 years of vigilance, about the 18 people who died because Richard Donovan valued uranium more than human life. And she thought about her daughter struggling to breathe, about medical bills that would never stop coming, about the weight of trying to be both father and mother to a child who deserved better than poverty and instability, and a mother too proud to accept help. "I'm going to use it," she said quietly. "The money, for Grace." "That's not selling out," Frank said. "That's being a mother." "Then why does it feel like I'm betraying Rose?" "Because doing the right thing and feeling good about it are two different animals. Rose knew that. She made hard choices every day for 40 years. Some of them were probably wrong, but she made them anyway, because that's what guardianship means. You stand watch even when you're not sure what you're protecting or why." Grace stirred, her eyes opening slowly. She looked at Kate, at Frank, at the hospital room around her. "Did I have another attack?" "Yeah, baby, a bad one, but you're okay now." "I'm sorry." The words broke Kate's heart. "Don't apologize for being sick. You didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but it costs money. And we don't have money." Grace's 8-year-old logic was flawless and devastating. "Maybe we should take Mr. Donovan's deal. Then I could get better and you wouldn't have to be sad all the time." Kate gathered her daughter into her arms, careful of the IV line and the oxygen tube, and held her with the kind of fierce love that made promises the world might not let her keep. "I'm going to figure this out," she whispered into Grace's hair. "I'm going to make sure you're okay. That's my job, being your mom, and I'm going to do it right." But even as she said it, Kate wondered what right looked like, when every choice carried the weight of history and hurt. They were discharged that afternoon with prescriptions Kate could now afford to fill, and a referral to Dr. Morrison that she could now afford to follow up on. Frank drove them back to the farmhouse, the Black Hills rising around them like sentinels guarding secrets they'd kept for millennia. Tomorrow, Kate would drive to Pine Ridge to meet Joseph Whitehawk. Tomorrow, she would learn what Rose had documented but never explained. Tomorrow, she would have to start making choices that would echo through generations, just like the choices made in 1952 still echoed in Caroline Donovan's struggling lungs and Grace's scarred airways. But tonight, she sat on Rose's porch, watching the sun set over land that was hers by inheritance and cursed by blood. Grace slept peacefully for the first time in days, her breathing steady and unlabored with the help of medications she could finally afford. And Kate held James Donovan's check in her hands and wondered what it cost to accept mercy from the descendants of murderers. The answer, she suspected, was everything, and also nothing. Because that was the terrible paradox of justice delayed. It transformed everyone it touched, making victims of the guilty and accomplices of the innocent, until no one could tell anymore where the original sin ended and the attempts at redemption began. The stars came out, the same stars that had watched 18 people die in 1952. The same stars that had watched Rose stand guard for 40 years. The same stars that would watch whatever Kate decided to do next. And in their cold, distant light, every path forward looked both right and wrong at exactly the same time. The drive to Pine Ridge took Kate through country that looked like the surface of some distant planet. Badlands stretched in every direction, layered stone carved by wind and water into shapes that suggested cathedrals built by a god with stranger geometries in mind. Grace sat in the passenger seat, oxygen saturation monitor clipped to her finger per Dr. Morrison's instructions, reading levels that stayed blessedly normal thanks to the new medications James Donovan's money had purchased. Frank had offered to come along, but Kate needed to do this alone, or as alone as a mother with a sick child could ever be. Some conversations required the intimacy of family, and Joseph Whitehawk was family even if Kate had never met him, even if decades and choices had carved canyons between them that might never be fully bridged. The Pine Ridge Reservation appeared like a collection of possibilities that had run out of time. Houses in various states of completion or collapse. Trailers that had been temporary 40 years ago and become permanent through the slow erosion of hope. But also gardens tended with care, children playing basketball on a court someone had painted over cracked asphalt, an elder sitting on a porch working leather with hands that knew the old patterns. The tribal council building was newer, built with casino money that had come too late to undo the damage of a century of broken promises. Kate parked and helped Grace out, both of them moving slowly in the way of people who'd learned that haste made breathing harder. Inside, a woman at the reception desk looked up from her computer. She was perhaps 50, with silver threading through black hair pulled back in a bun, wearing a ribbon shirt in traditional colors. "I'm looking for Joseph Whitehawk," Kate said. "He's expecting me." The woman's expression shifted, something like recognition mixed with curiosity. "You must be Rose's granddaughter. He's been watching for you all morning. Conference room 2, down the hall on the left." The conference room held a long table, chairs pushed back against the walls, and windows that looked out over the reservation toward hills that had witnessed everything and remembered more. Joseph Whitehawk stood at those windows, his back to the door, shoulders carrying the weight of 71 years and all the history that came with being Lakota in America. He turned when Kate entered. His face was carved from the same stone as the Badlands, weathered and strong and holding the kind of beauty that came from endurance rather than youth. His hair was silver, worn in a long braid down his back. Turquoise hung at his throat on leather cord. His eyes were Rose's eyes, dark and deep and holding sorrows Kate could only guess at. "Kate," he said her name like a prayer or an apology, "and this must be Grace." Grace, shy suddenly, pressed against Kate's side, but she managed a small hello. Joseph smiled, and the expression transformed his face into something gentler. "You look like your great-grandmother did when she was young, before life taught her to be hard." He gestured to chairs. "Sit, please. We have much to talk about and not as much time as I'd like." They sat. Grace pulled out the drawing pad she'd brought, began sketching the view from the window with the focused concentration of a child creating her own escape route from adult conversations. "Frank Garrison called with me last night," Joseph began. "Told me about Grace's hospital visit. Told me James Donovan gave you $25,000 with no strings attached. Is that why you wanted to see me? To tell me I was wrong to accept it?" "No." Joseph's voice was firm, but not unkind. "I wanted to see you to tell you that moral purity is a luxury our family has never been able to afford. Rose took money from the Donovan family too. Not much, but some. Emergency payments when the well ran dry or the roof needed repair and she had no other options. She hated herself for it every time, but she did it anyway because sometimes survival requires compromise." Kate felt something release in her chest. Permission, maybe. Or just the relief of knowing she wasn't the first to make impossible choices. "Rose wrote to me every month for 40 years, Joseph continued. Long letters documenting everything. Who came to the property, what they offered, what threats they made. She was building a case, Kate. Evidence so comprehensive that eventually, someday, someone might be able to use it to demand real accountability." "Did you read the letters?" "Everyone. And I kept them. They're part of the tribal archives now, along with the documents Rose compiled. But there's more. things she never put in letters because they were too dangerous to trust to mail. Joseph pulled a set of keys from his pocket, old brass worn smooth by decades of handling. These opened the storm cellar at the farmhouse. Rose gave them to me 5 years ago when she started getting sick. Made me promise to give them to you if anything happened to her. Kate took the keys. They were warm from Joseph's pocket, heavier than they should have been. Frank said there was a code. There is. The code opens the outer door. These keys open what's inside. Joseph's expression grew heavier. Rose didn't just document the Donovan family's crimes. She documented her own life. And Kate, what she built there, it's not what you think. It's not just evidence and anger. It's something else, something better. Grace looked up from her drawing. What did Great-Grandma Rose build? Joseph turned to the child with the kind of attention adults rarely gave to 8-year-olds. She built a refuge, a place where people who were broken could go to heal. Did your mother tell you about Rose living alone for 40 years? Grace nodded. She wasn't alone. Not really. She just chose her company carefully. Joseph stood, moved to the window again. In 1994, a girl came to Rose's door, 13 years old, pregnant, running from abuse. Rose took her in, helped her through the pregnancy, taught her about plants and strength and choosing your own path. That girl stayed 2 years, then left to go to college. Last I heard, she's a doctor in Minneapolis. Kate's breath caught. Rose helped her? Rose helped 63 people over 40 years. Runaways, abuse survivors, people who needed to disappear for a while. She never advertised. Word just spread quietly among certain communities. The crazy lady in the farmhouse would help if you really needed it. Joseph turned back to them. The storm cellar isn't just an archive, Kate. It's a testament. Proof that one person's life, even a life lived in isolation, can ripple outward in ways we never see. The weight of this information settled over Kate like snowfall. Rose hadn't been a bitter hermit nursing old wounds. She'd been a guardian in more ways than one, protecting land and protecting people, and somehow finding the strength to do both alone. There's something else you need to know, Joseph said. Something Rose discovered 3 months before she died about Caroline Donovan. Kate's stomach tightened. Frank told me about the genetic mutation, the radiation damage passed down through generations. Did he tell you that Rose has proof? Medical records Rebecca Donovan gave her before Rebecca died. Genetic test results showing the exact mutation and its likely cause. Joseph's voice was heavy. Rose was going to tell James. She'd decided that truth mattered more than Rebecca's wishes. But then Rose got sick herself, and by the time she had the strength to make that call, she realized something. Telling James wouldn't help Carolyn. It would just give him one more weight to carry, one more reason to hate his family's legacy. So she kept it secret. She kept it secret, and she left the decision to you. There's a box in the storm cellar, medical records, genetic tests, a letter Rebecca wrote explaining everything. Rose's instructions say you're to give it to James if you think he can bear it, or burn it if you think some truths do more harm than good. Grace had stopped drawing. She was listening with the intensity children showed when they sensed important things being decided around them. What do you think we should do, Mr. Whitehawk? Joseph smiled sadly at her. I think there are no easy answers, little one. Only choices that echo forward in time. Your mother will have to decide what kind of echo she wants to create. They talked for another hour. Joseph showed Kate photographs from the letters Rose had sent, images of the farmhouse through the decades, pictures of some of the people Rose had helped, their faces blurred for privacy, but their gratitude clear in their posture. Letters of thanks written in shaky hands, or careful print, or the confident script of those who'd found their footing again. When it was time to leave, Joseph walked them to the car. He touched Kate's shoulder, brief and warm. Rose loved you. She loved your mother. But she thought love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant distance. She was wrong about that. Love should bring us closer, not push us away. Don't make her mistake, Kate. Whatever you decide about the land, about Donovan, about all of it, don't choose it over Grace. I won't. Good. Joseph looked at Grace. Take care of your mother. She's going to need you to be strong. Grace nodded solemnly. I'm good at being strong. I've had lots of practice. The drive back to the farmhouse took them through sunset, the sky turning colors that seemed impossible, oranges and purples that belonged in paintings rather than reality. Grace fell asleep in the passenger seat, her breathing steady and unlabored. the oxygen monitor showing numbers that meant safety. Frank's truck was parked at the farmhouse when they arrived. He sat on the porch with two other men, all of them with the weathered look of people who'd spent their lives outdoors doing hard work. They stood when Kate pulled up, and she recognized the careful way they positioned themselves. Protective but not threatening. Guards who didn't want to be seen as guards. "Everything okay?" Kate asked, helping Grace out of the car. "Had some visitors this afternoon," Frank said. "Black SUV, two men in suits. They didn't get out, just parked at the end of the driveway for about an hour watching. When I walked out to ask what they wanted, they drove off." Kate felt ice in her stomach. "Donovan's people?" "Maybe, or one of the other companies Joseph mentioned. Either way, I called in some favors. Jim and Ed here, they worked with me at the mine. They're going to take shifts watching the property for a while, just until we know you're safe." Jim was perhaps 60, built like a barrel with arms that suggested decades of hauling ore. Ed was younger, maybe 50, with a scar running down his left cheek and kind eyes that didn't match his fighter's face. They both nodded to Kate, silent agreements that needed no elaboration. "I can't pay you," Kate said. "Didn't ask you to," Jim replied. His voice was gravel and whiskey, rough but not unkind. "Frank says Rose's granddaughter needs help. That's enough." After they'd gotten Grace settled and asleep, Kate stood on the porch with Frank, watching the stars emerge one by one. The two guards had positioned themselves strategically. Jim near the barn, Ed by the silo, both of them invisible in the darkness, but present in the way that mattered. "Joseph gave me the keys to the storm cellar," Kate said. "Are you going to open it tonight? Should I wait?" Frank considered this. Rose lived 40 years carrying those secrets alone. "I don't think one more night will matter, but I also don't think you'll sleep until you know what's down there." He was right. Kate could feel the pull of it, the need to understand what Rose had built and why she'd guarded it so fiercely. "Will you come with me?" "If you want company. But Kate, some discoveries need to be made alone." In the end, Kate went by herself. She took a flashlight and the keys Joseph had given her and walked to the storm cellar behind the chicken coop. The digital keypad glowed faintly in the darkness. She entered the code Frank had told her days ago, the numbers that marked the day 18 people died. 071452. The lock clicked. The heavy door opened with a hydraulic hiss that suggested maintenance far beyond what an 87-year-old woman should have been capable of. Solar-powered, Kate realized. Rose had been more resourceful than anyone knew. Stairs descended into darkness. Kate clicked on the flashlight and went down. The storm cellar was larger than the footprint suggested. Someone, Rose presumably, had expanded it over the years, digging deeper and wider until it became a proper underground room. The walls were lined with metal shelving units, industrial grade and carefully organized. Boxes labeled by year, filing cabinets labeled by category, and in the center of the room a desk with a computer that looked no more than 5 years old. Kate approached the desk first. Next to the computer was a note in Rose's handwriting. "Watch the video first. It will explain everything else." The computer powered on with a soft hum. A single file sat on the desktop. "For Kate, final message." Kate clacked. Rose's face appeared on screen, filmed in this very room. Her grandmother looked tired, oxygen tube in her nose. Shoulders thin under a flannel shirt, but her eyes were clear and determined. "Hello, my beautiful granddaughter." Rose's voice cracked slightly. "If you're watching this, it means I'm gone and you found what I've been protecting. Not just the uranium, not just the evidence against the Donovan family, but this." She gestured around the room. 40 years of proof that one person can make a difference, even in isolation. Rose leaned forward, closer to the camera. "I need to tell you why I really stayed. Everyone thought it was to guard the uranium, and yes, that was part of it. The land Thomas died protecting had to stay protected. But Kate, that was just the excuse, the armor I wore so no one would look too closely at what I was really doing." The video cut to footage Kate had never seen. Rose younger, maybe in her 50s, standing in the farmhouse with a teenage girl, both of them kneading bread, talking quietly, the girl's face lit with something like hope. Rose's voiceover continued. "In 1994, Sarah came to my door. She'd heard about the crazy Lakota lady who lived alone and might help someone in trouble. She was 13, pregnant, terrified. I took her in, not because I was noble or good, but because I recognized in her what I'd felt when I was pregnant with your mother. Alone, scared, certain that the world had no place for someone like me. More footage, different people, a boy, maybe 16, a woman with two small children, an elder man who looked like he'd given up until he found his way to Rose's door. All of them in the farmhouse, being fed, being listened to, being given the space to heal. Over 40 years, I helped 63 people, Rose said. Runaways, abuse survivors, people who needed to disappear for a while. They came because someone told someone who told someone that the farmhouse was safe. And Kate, that's what it became. Not a guard post, not a monument to the dead, but a place where the living could find refuge. The video cut back to Rose in the storm cellar. She looked directly at the camera, directly at Kate across time and death. I thought I was alone for 40 years. I told myself I'd sacrificed everything for duty, but I was never alone. I was planting seeds, and they grew into forests I'll never see, but you will. Rose's voice thickened with emotion. In Bach's future plans, you'll find letters, 63 letters from every person I helped. They wrote to me over the years, thanking me, updating me on their lives. Sarah, that first girl, she named her daughter Rose. She's a doctor now, working in underserved communities. Michael, a gay teenager I hid from his abusive father, he runs an LGBTQ shelter in Denver. Lisa, the domestic violence survivor, her children are grown. One's a lawyer fighting for indigenous rights. Rose wiped her eyes. I thought I'd given up my family for duty. But Kate, I built a different kind of family. One that stretched across decades and distance. And now I'm giving that family to you. The camera zoomed closer on Rose's face. The farmhouse is becoming a national monument. But make sure it's more than just a museum. Make it what it's always been, a place where broken people can heal, where runaways find shelter, where survivors find strength. That's the real inheritance. Not the land, not the evidence, the legacy of care. Rose's final words came soft but clear. Don't mourn my 40 years, Kate. I chose them, and they were full. Guard the land, yes, but more, guard the people. That's what Thomas would have wanted. That's what I want for you. The video ended. Kate sat in the silence of the storm cellar, tears streaming down her face. She'd spent days thinking about Rose's sacrifice, about the loneliness of 40 years standing watch. But Rose hadn't been lonely. She'd been purposeful, choosing isolation from her own family to create refuge for other people's families. Kate opened the box labeled Future Plans with trembling hands. Inside were 63 letters, organized chronologically. She read the first one from Sarah, dated 1996. Dear Rose, I graduated high school. Top of my class. My daughter is 2 now, healthy and happy. I named her Rose after you. I'm going to college in the fall, pre-med. I want to help people the way you helped me. Thank you for teaching me that strength isn't hardness, it's softness that refuses to break. Letter after letter, stories of lives rebuilt, children raised, careers found, healing earned through time and care in the memory of an old woman who'd given them sanctuary when they needed it most. And at the bottom of the box, dated 3 months ago, a letter addressed not to Rose but to Kate. Dear Kate Sullivan, we are 63 PAE whose lives were changed by Rose Whitehawk. We've stayed in contact over the years, a quiet community bound by gratitude. When Rose told us about you, about your struggles, about Grace's illness, we wanted to help. We're not rich, but we're stable. Thanks to Rose. Enclosed, please find a cashier's check for $89,000 for Grace's medical care. Not charity. Repayment of a debt we can never fully settle. Welcome to the family Rose built. Kate found the check, real, valid. $89,000 from people she'd never met, people whose lives had intersected with Rose's decades before Kate was born. She sat in the storm cellar, surrounded by evidence of a life she'd never known her grandmother had lived, and she understood for the first time what guardianship really meant. Not just protecting, but creating space for others to survive, to heal, to become. Morning light was torching the hills when Kate finally climbed out of the storm cellar. Frank was waiting on the porch with coffee, patient as stone. Did you find what you needed? I found everything. Kate's voice was rough from crying. Rose wasn't who I thought she was. She was better. Yes. Kate sat beside him, taking the coffee he offered. Frank, there's $89,000 in there from people Rose helped over the years. They knew about Grace. They wanted to help. Frank smiled. That sounds like Rose, building networks no one else could see. I could pay off all of Grace's medical bills, set up a fund for ongoing care. We'd be stable, actually stable. You could? Kate looked at the farmhouse, at the land stretching away toward the hills, at the life Rose had built in isolation that turned out not to be isolated at all. Or I could use it to turn this place into what Rose wanted, a refuge. Keep helping people. You could do both, Frank said quietly. Some for Grace's care, some to start the refuge. Don't make Rose's mistake of thinking you have to choose between family and purpose. They're the same thing. Before Kate could respond, a car appeared on the driveway. Not a black SUV this time. A modest sedan, blue and practical. It parked near the house, and a teenage girl got out. Dark hair, thin frame, oxygen concentrator backpack over her shoulders. Caroline Donovan. She walked toward the porch slowly, breathing carefully, each step measured. When she was close enough for Kate to see her face clearly, Kate recognized James Donovan's tired eyes and something else. Determination. The kind that came from living with chronic illness and refusing to let it define you. Miss Sullivan, Caroline's voice was steady despite the careful breathing. I'm sorry to come without calling, but I needed to talk to you away from my father. Kate stood. Does he know you're here? He thinks I'm at school. I took an Uber. Probably going to get grounded for the rest of my life. But this was important. Carolyn looked at Grace, who'd woken and come outside wearing yesterday's clothes and bedhead. Hi, I'm Carolyn. I'm Grace. You have the backpack like Dr. Morrison wanted me to get. Yeah, it sucks, but it helps. Carolyn turned back to Kate. Can we talk? Just for a few minutes? They sat at Rose's dining table, the one set for 3 that now held 4. Frank made hot chocolate for the girls and coffee for Kate and himself, then excused himself to check on Jim and Ed's position. Caroline wrapped her hands around the hot chocolate mug like she was trying to absorb its warmth. I know why you're here. I know what my father offered you. $5 million to seal the land. He told you about that? He tells me everything, always has. He thinks I deserve to know where our money comes from. Carolyn's expression was bitter for someone so young. I was 14 when he sat me down and explained that my great-great-grandfather murdered 18 Lakota people for uranium, that our family's wealth was built on genocide. Grace's eyes went wide. Kate put a hand on her daughter's shoulder, grounding. I know you're trying to decide whether to take the money, Caroline continued, whether my father's guilty enough that you should reject anything he offers. And I wanted to tell you, you should take it. You should take everything he offers and use it to make Grace better, because I'm not worth protecting. Caroline, let me finish. The girl's voice shook but didn't break. I know my CF might be connected to radiation exposure from 1952. I overheard my mom talking to someone on the phone before she died. I've done the research. The mutation I have, it's rare. It's linked to genetic damage from radioactive materials. My great-great-grandfather poisoned those 18 people with uranium, and now that poison is in my DNA. Kate's breath caught. Your father doesn't know you know. No, and I'm not going to tell him, because he's carrying enough guilt already. Carolyn looked at Grace. You're 8, right? Grace nodded. When I was 8, I spent 2 months in the hospital with pneumonia. I missed my entire 3rd grade year. My mom had to quit her job to take care of me full time. I heard her crying at night, these tiny sounds she tried to muffle so I wouldn't hear. I knew even then that I was breaking her heart just by being sick. Grace's face showed recognition, the understanding of one chronically ill child recognizing another. I don't want to be the reason someone else's mother cries, Carolyn said. I don't want my existence to be a burden that prevents justice. So, Ms. Sullivan, whatever you decide about the land, about exposing what my family did, don't hold back because of me. I'll survive. I've been surviving my whole life. Kate studied the girl's face, seeing the strength that came from years of fighting for each breath, seeing also the loneliness of someone who decided they didn't deserve protection. Caroline, can I tell you something? The girl nodded. You're not your great-great-grandfather. You're not responsible for his crimes. And the fact that you carry genetic damage from his actions doesn't make you complicit. It makes you a victim too. But I benefit from what he did. The money that pays for my treatment, it came from uranium deals my family made. I'm alive because of blood money. And 63 people are alive because my grandmother turned blood money into refuge, Kate said quietly. We don't choose where we come from or what we inherit. We only choose what we do with it. Grace reached it across the table and took Carolyn's hand. The gesture was so pure, so uncomplicated by adult complexity that both Kate and Caroline teared up. I have asthma, Grace said simply. It's different from your CF, but it's scary. And sometimes I feel bad because it costs Mom so much money. But she says I'm not allowed to apologize for being sick. So you're not allowed either. Caroline laughed through tears. Okay, deal. They talked for another hour. Caroline told them about her school, about debate team, and the college applications she was starting to think about, even though she wasn't sure she'd live long enough to graduate. Grace told Caroline about the drawings she made, about the rabbit with the missing eye, about the farmhouse that used to be scary, but now felt like maybe it could be home. When Caroline's phone buzzed with messages from her father, worry bleeding through the texts, she stood reluctantly. I should go. He's going to kill me for skipping school. Caroline, wait. Kate pulled out her phone, found the number James had given her. I'm going to call your father. Tell him you're here and you're safe, and I'm driving you home. You don't have to. I want to. I think he and I need to talk anyway, and I think you've earned the right to be part of that conversation. The drive to Rapid City took 40 minutes. Carolyn and Grace sat in the back seat, talking quietly about oxygen concentrators and inhalers and the particular loneliness of being the sick kid at school. Kate listened to them find common ground in their shared struggle and thought about how illness could isolate or connect depending on who you found to share the burden. James Donovan was waiting on his front porch when they arrived. His house was large but not ostentatious, built from wood and stone with views of the Black Hills. He came down the steps as Kate parked, his face tight with worry that transformed to relief when he saw Carolyn was safe. Dad, before you yell, Caroline said, climbing out of the car, Miss Sullivan didn't kidnap me. I went to her. We'll discuss your ability to make autonomous decisions later, James said. But his arms were around his daughter, holding her like she might disappear if he let go. Over her head, he met Kate's eyes. Thank you for bringing her home safely. Can we talk? Kate asked. All of us. I think it's time. They sat in James's living room. Grace and Carolyn on the sofa with hot chocolate James made himself, not asking a housekeeper or servant to do it. Kate and James in chairs facing each other, the kind of positioning that suggested negotiation or confrontation or both. Caroline told you why she came to see me, Kate began. I assumed it was about the land offer. It was, but it was also about something else. Kate looked at Caroline, who nodded permission. She wanted to tell me not to hold back from exposing your family's crimes because of her. She thinks she doesn't deserve protection. James's face went very still. Caroline, Dad, I know about the genetic connection. I know my CF is probably caused by great-great-grandpa's radiation poisoning. Caroline's voice was steady despite her father's shock. I've known for 2 years, since before Mom died. Rebecca told you? I overheard her on the phone, and I researched it myself. Carolyn looked at her father with the kind of love that made allowances for weakness. I didn't tell you because you were already carrying so much guilt. But Dad, it's okay. It's not your fault I'm sick. It's just what happened. James broke down. Not the controlled emotion of boardroom tears, but the gut-wrenching sobs of a father confronted with his daughter's suffering and his own powerlessness to prevent it. Kate looked away, giving him the privacy of his grief. When James could speak again, his voice was raw. I've spent 10 years trying to make amends for my grandfather's crimes. I thought if I could just do enough good, give enough money, acknowledge the truth publicly enough, maybe I could balance the scales. But Caroline's illness, it's proof that some damage can't be undone. It just echoes forward forever. Or, Kate said quietly, it's proof that we're all connected, that harm ripples outward and touches everyone, even those who didn't cause it. Your family's crime hurt the Lakota people who died, but it also hurt your family. And acknowledging that doesn't erase anyone's suffering. It just makes us all human. James looked at her with something like hope. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm going to take your offer. The $5 million to seal the land and create a monument. But I want to modify the terms. How? The monument needs to be more than just a memorial to the dead. It needs to be a living refuge. A place where people who are broken can come to heal. Rose spent 40 years doing that quietly. I want to do it publicly, with your money and the Lakota Nation's blessing and anyone else who wants to help build something better than what came before. James leaned forward. What would you need? Time? Resources? Support from people who understand that justice isn't about revenge. It's about breaking cycles. Kate pulled out her phone, showed him the picture she'd taken of the check from Rose's network. $89,000 from 63 people my grandmother helped over 40 years. They're proof that one person's commitment to care can ripple outward in ways we can't predict. I'll match it, James said immediately. Dollar for dollar. Whatever those 63 people gave, I'll match. And I'll set up an endowment, $2 million to fund the refuge in perpetuity. I want Caroline involved, Kate said, if she's willing. I want her to help design the programs, to be part of building something that acknowledges the past but focuses on the future. Caroline's face lit up despite the oxygen tube and the exhaustion that sat on her like a weight. Really? Really? You understand what it's like to suffer from someone else's choices. That makes you exactly the right person to help create a place where people can heal from the choices that broke them. Kate drove home in the dark, Grace asleep in the passenger seat, the black hills rising around them like ancient witnesses to the conversation that had just changed everything. She thought about Rose spending 40 years alone, except she hadn't been alone. She thought about Caroline carrying genetic damage from her great-great-grandfather's crime, carrying it with grace and refusing to let it define her. She thought about the 63 people whose lives had been changed by one old woman's commitment to care. And she thought about what she was building, not just a monument to the dead, but a refuge for the living, a place where Rose's legacy could continue, where broken people could heal, where the cycles of harm could be interrupted by deliberate acts of compassion. When they reached the farmhouse, Frank was waiting with news. Joseph called. The tribal council wants to meet with you tomorrow. They've heard about Donovan's offer, and they want to be part of whatever happens next. Good, that Kate said. They should be. This isn't just my land or Donovan's money. It's healing that belongs to everyone. That night, Kate couldn't sleep. She went back to the storm cellar, to Rose's desk, to the evidence her grandmother had compiled over 40 years. But instead of reading about crimes and injustice, she read the letters, story after story of lives rebuilt. People who'd come to the farmhouse broken and left whole, or at least whole enough to keep going. She found a journal Rose had kept, separate from the evidence files. Personal reflections written late at night when insomnia and purpose kept her awake. One entry, dated 2020, caught Kate's eye. I wonder sometimes if I made the right choice. Staying here, guarding this land, helping strangers instead of knowing my own granddaughter. But tonight a woman came to the door. She'd been beaten so badly she could barely walk. She had 3 children with her, all under 8 years old. And when I gave them sanctuary, when I fed them and put them to bed safely, I saw the oldest child's face. She looked at me like I was a miracle, like the world hadn't completely abandoned her after all. And I thought, this is why, this moment, this child learning that safety exists, that's why I stayed. Kate closed the journal, tears streaming down her face. Rose had made choices Kate was only beginning to understand. Choices that cost her family but created family in different form. And now those choices were Kate's to continue or transform or honor in whatever way she could manage. The stars were fading when Kate climbed out of the storm cellar. Dawn was coming, turning the eastern sky pale gold. Grace would wake soon, breathing steady and unlabored thanks to medications purchased with Donovan money and network generosity. Carolyn would wake in her own bed, oxygen concentrator humming, facing another day of fighting for each breath. James would wake carrying guilt that might never fully lift, but had found at least a path toward redemption. And Kate would wake knowing she'd found something she hadn't known she was looking for. Not wealth, though money would come. Not security, though stability was closer than it had been in years. But purpose, the kind of purpose that came from being part of something larger than yourself. From guarding not just land, but people. From building refuge in a world that seemed designed to break the vulnerable. Rose had planted seeds for 40 years, thinking she was alone. But she'd built forests. And now Kate stood at the edge of those forests, ready to help them grow. The tribal council chamber was not what Kate expected. She'd imagined something formal, sterile, governmental. Instead, she walked into a circular room built in the traditional way, cedar posts supporting a dome painted with symbols she couldn't read but felt in her bones. The council members sat in a semicircle, 11 men and women ranging from perhaps 40 to well past 80, all of them carrying the weight of their people's history in faces carved by weather and worry, and the particular exhaustion that came from fighting for dignity in a country that had spent centuries trying to erase you. Joseph Whitehawk sat among them, his silver braid catching the morning light that came through the dome's central opening. He nodded to Kate as she entered, a gesture that said both welcome and I'm sorry for what you're about to face. Grace held Katie's hand tight. They debated whether to bring her, but Grace had insisted. They need to see me, she'd said with the strange wisdom 8-year-olds sometimes possessed. They need to know this isn't just about old people and old problems. It's about kids, too. The eldest council member, a woman whose face held the topography of 90 years, raised her hand for silence. The murmur of conversation died. Kate Sullivan, Rose Whitehawk's granddaughter. Her voice carried the rasp of decades of tobacco and wind. I am Mary Redbird. My grandfather was one of the 18 murdered in 1952. You come here with an offer from the Donovan family. We would hear it. Kate had rehearsed this. Frank had helped her prepare, warning her that tribal politics were complex, that not everyone would see Donovan's money as opportunity rather than insult. But standing here under the weight of 11 pairs of eyes, all the rehearsal evaporated. James Donovan has offered $5 million to purchase my grandmother's land, Kate began. Her voice shook slightly. She steadied it. His terms are to seal the uranium deposit permanently, deed the land to the Lakota Nation with a conservation easement prohibiting all mining, and build a memorial to the 18 people his grandfather murdered. One of the younger council members, a man perhaps 50 with anger sitting on his shoulders like a cloak, spoke before Mary could respond. Blood money. He thinks he can buy absolution for genocide. Marcus, Mary's voice was soft but absolute. Let her finish. Kate nodded thanks. I've modified his terms. The memorial will be built, yes, names and truth, but the farmhouse will become more than a monument to the dead. It will be what my grandmother made it, a refuge for the living. She pulled out her phone, showed them the picture of the $89,000 check. My grandmother helped 63 people over 40 years. Runaways, abuse survivors, people who needed sanctuary. They've stayed connected, built a network. They want to continue her work. And James Donovan has agreed to match their contribution dollar for dollar, plus create a $2 million endowment to fund the refuge in perpetuity. So we're supposed to thank the descendant of our people's murderer for his generosity? Marcus's voice dripped contempt. Take his money and forget that 18 of our ancestors died choking on arsenic and radiation? No. Kate met his eyes. We're supposed to remember them by creating something that prevents future harm, by building refuge in a world that still breaks vulnerable people, by teaching the next generation that healing is possible even when justice comes too late. Joseph stood. The movement drew all eyes to him. I've read Rose's letters, all 486 of them. She documented every offer Donovan Mining made over 40 years, every threat, every attempt at bribery, and she wrote about every person she helped, every life she saved by refusing to sell that land for profit. He turned to face Kate. My sister guarded that uranium deposit because Thomas died for it, but she built a refuge because she understood something the rest of us forgot. That standing against evil isn't enough. You have to create good in its place. Mary Redbird closed her eyes, her weathered hands folded in her lap. When she spoke, it was with the authority of someone who'd outlived most of her generation and earned the right to speak for ghosts. I was 10 years old when my grandfather died, old enough to remember him. He was kind. He grew corn and told stories and believed the land was sacred not because of what you could take from it, but because of what it gave freely if you treated it with respect. She opened her eyes, looked at Kate. The uranium under that land, it's poison. Always was. My grandfather knew that. Thomas Whitehawk knew that. The 18 who died, they knew that. They refused to sell not because they were stubborn, but because they understood that some things you dig up only to release more poison into the world. Then seal it, Marcus said. Take Donovan's money, seal the mine, build the memorial. But why make it a refuge? Why give the Donovan family the satisfaction of seeing their name attached to something good? Because Caroline Donovan is 16 years old and dying from her great-great-grandfather's crime. Kate's words landed like stones in still water. Because she carries genetic damage from the radiation her ancestor used to murder your ancestors. Because the poison didn't stop with 18 deaths. It's still echoing forward. The silence in the room was absolute. Kate continued. James Donovan learned 3 days ago that his daughter's illness is connected to 1952. He learned it from her, not from medical records or family confession. His 16-year-old daughter had to explain to him that she's paying the price for a genocide she had no part in. And instead of using that as justification to walk away from all responsibility, he's trying to build something better. She looked around the circle of faces. I'm not asking you to forgive. I'm not even asking you to forget. I'm asking you to be part of creating a future where the next 16-year-old, Lakota or White or anyone else, doesn't have to carry poison they didn't choose. Mary Redbird raised her hand again. We will discuss this in private council. You will wait outside. Kate and Grace sat on a bench in the hallway for nearly 2 hours. Other people passed, some staring, some nodding, some stopping to ask if they needed water or food. Grace drew in her sketch pad, creating an image of the council room from memory, the dome and the cedar posts and the faces of people carrying history. When the door finally opened, Joseph emerged first. His face was unreadable. They're ready for you. Back inside, the council members had rearranged themselves slightly. Mary Redbird now stood, her small frame somehow commanding the entire space. We have voted, she said, 8 in favor, 3 opposed. The Lakota Nation will accept the land transfer with the terms you have proposed. The memorial will be built. The refuge will operate under joint oversight, tribal council, and a board that includes yourself, James Donovan, and representatives from the network your grandmother built. Kate felt relief flood through her. Thank you. Don't thank us yet. Mary's eyes were sharp. There are conditions. First, the memorial will tell the whole truth, not a sanitized version. The arsenic, the radiation, the government's complicity, all of it. Second, James Donovan will make a public statement, not through lawyers or corporate spokespeople. Him, on camera, acknowledging his family's crimes. Third, the refuge will prioritize indigenous people. Others can be helped, but our people come first. Agreed. Kate didn't hesitate. All of it. Then there's one more thing. Mary looked at Grace, who'd been sitting quietly, listening to everything with the intensity of a child who understood more than adults gave her credit for. This child, Rose's great-great-granddaughter, she carries both Lakota and White blood. She will be part of the refuge's youth council when she's old enough. She will learn our ways. She will understand what it means to be both victim and beneficiary of history. Grace looked at Kate, uncertainty in her young face. Kate squeezed her hand. I'd like that, Grace said softly, if Mom says it's okay. It's more than okay, Kate said. It's an honor. The drive back to the farmhouse should have felt triumphant. They'd won. The land would be protected. The refuge would be built. Justice of a sort had been achieved. But Kate felt the weight of what came next pressing down on her. The public statement Mary had demanded. James Donovan would have to stand in front of cameras and acknowledge his family's genocide. And Kate would have to be there, witnessing it, part of the machinery that would either break him or remake him. Frank was waiting at the farmhouse with news. James called. He wants to hold the press conference here. Tomorrow, says it needs to happen on the land where the crimes occurred. Did you tell him what the council demanded? He already knew. Joseph called him an hour ago. James says he's ready. Frank's weathered face showed concern. Kate, this is going to be national news. Maybe international. Mining company CEO admits ancestor committed genocide. Environmental groups will celebrate. Conservative media will attack. You and Grace are going to be in the middle of it. I know. Are you ready for that? Kate looked at the farmhouse, at the land rolling away toward the hills, at the place Rose had guarded for 40 years, while quietly building networks of care that rippled outward in ways she'd never fully seen. No, but I don't think anyone's ever ready for the moment when private truth becomes public reckoning. That evening, Kate called James to discuss logistics. His voice on the phone sounded hollowed out, like he'd been carved from the inside and left with just enough to function. Caroline wants to be there tomorrow, he said, at the press conference, standing next to me when I make the statement. James, that's not necessary. She doesn't have to. She insists. Says if I'm going to talk about how our family's crimes are still causing harm, she has the right to be visible proof. He paused, and Kate heard the sound of breath drawn and released with difficulty. I tried to protect her from this. Her whole life, I tried to shield her from the worst of what our family did. But she's braver than I am. She wants to face it head on. What about you? Are you ready? Long silence. Then, I've been preparing for this my whole life without knowing it. Every corporate report I've filed, Every shareholder meeting I've chaired, every negotiation I've conducted, it was all rehearsal for the one true thing I needed to say. My grandfather was a murderer. My family profited from genocide, and I'm sorry. James, sorry isn't going to be enough for a lot of people. I know, but it's all I have. That and money and the willingness to spend the rest of whatever time I have left trying to build something better than what I inherited. After they hung up, Kate sat on Rose's porch watching stars emerge. Grace was inside, asleep early after the emotional weight of the council meeting. Frank had gone home, promising to return at dawn with Jim and Ed to help manage the press that would descend on the property. Kate thought about James Donovan, a man she'd met less than a week ago, a man whose grandfather had committed atrocities that still echoed in Carolyn's labored breathing and the genetic damage written into her cells. She thought about how easy it would be to hate him, how satisfying it might feel to watch him publicly humiliated, destroyed by the revelation of his family's crimes. But she didn't hate him. She pitied him. And more than that, she recognized in him something she saw in herself, the burden of inheriting choices you didn't make, the weight of trying to be better than what came before, the desperate hope that maybe, somehow, you could transform poison into medicine. The press started arriving at 6 in the morning, vans with satellite dishes, reporters with camera crews, print journalists with recorders and notebooks. They parked along the dirt road leading to the farmhouse, a caravan of attention that Rose had spent 40 years avoiding. Frank and his friends established a perimeter, keeping the press at a distance until the conference was scheduled to begin at 10. Kate watched from the window as more vehicles arrived. Local news, regional outlets, then the national networks, CNN, Fox, MSNBC, all of them smelling blood and redemption in equal measure. At 9:30 James Donovan's car appeared. Not the black SUVs this time, just his personal vehicle, modest and unassuming. Carolyn sat in the passenger seat, oxygen concentrator visible through the window. They parked near the house, and James helped his daughter out with the careful attention of someone who'd spent years learning how to assist without hovering. Kate met them at the door. Carolyn looked pale but determined, her dark hair pulled back, wearing a simple dress that made her look younger than 16 and older at the same time. James wore a suit but had left the tie undone, his hair slightly mussed as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. "Thank you for letting us do this here," he said. "It's the right place, where it happened, where it needs to be acknowledged." They'd set up a podium near the oak tree, the one that marked where the feast had occurred, where 18 people had consumed food laced with arsenic and dusted with uranium oxide. Frank had hung a banner behind the podium with the names of the victims, carefully researched and verified. Thomas Whitehawk at the top, Mary Redbird's grandfather, John, near the bottom. 18 names, 18 lives, one genocide. At 10 o'clock exactly, James walked to the podium. Carolyn stood to his left, Grace to his right at Kate's request. 2 daughters, one dying from radiation damage, one struggling with asthma exacerbated by poverty, both of them proof that history's poisons didn't stay in the past. The cameras focused, the reporters readied their recorders. The world, or at least the part of it that paid attention to such things, held its breath. James looked directly into the cameras. His voice when he spoke was steady, clear, unflinching. "My name is James Donovan. I'm the CEO of Apex Resources and the great-grandson of Richard Donovan. In 1952, my great-grandfather orchestrated the murder of 18 Lakota people on this land. He did it to acquire uranium rights. He did it with the knowledge and tacit approval of United States government officials who wanted the uranium for nuclear weapons and power plants. He did it with arsenic and radiation. And he did it without remorse." The words fell like hammer blows. Kate saw reporters exchange glances, camera operators zoom in closer. "For 72 years, my family has benefited from those murders. The uranium extracted from this and other properties acquired through similar methods built our company, funded our lifestyle, and allowed us to present ourselves as respectable members of society. We were not respectable. We were the beneficiaries of genocide." James paused, and Kate saw his hands shake slightly on the podium. Carolyn reached over, touched his arm. The gesture was brief, but it steadied him. "I learned about my great-grandfather's crimes when I was 22 years old. My father gave me documents, confessions, evidence. He told me the truth he'd learned too late to act on. and he asked me to decide what to do with that knowledge. For 30 years, I did nothing. I told myself that the past was past, that I couldn't undo what Richard Donovan had done, that managing the company ethically going forward was enough. I was wrong. He looked at Caroline. My daughter has cystic fibrosis. It's a genetic condition caused by a specific mutation. That mutation has been linked in research to radiation exposure in previous generations. My great-great-grandmother was Lakota. She survived the 1952 poisoning because she was pregnant and missed the feast. But she was exposed to lower levels of radiation from the contaminated site. That exposure damaged her DNA. The damage passed through my great-grandfather, my grandfather, my father, and me. It manifested in my daughter's lungs. Gasps from the press pool. Cameras swiveled to Caroline, who stood straight despite the oxygen tube, refusing to be reduced to victim or symbol. So the genocide my great-grandfather committed, it didn't end with 18 deaths. It's still killing, still causing harm. My daughter is paying the price for a crime committed before her grandparents were born. James's voice broke slightly. He cleared his throat, continued. I can't bring back the 18 people who died. I can't undo 72 years of my family profiting from their murders. But I can do this. I can tell the truth. I can acknowledge that Apex Resources was built on blood. And I can try to transform that legacy into something that causes less harm. He outlined the agreement. $5 million for the land, the conservation easement, the memorial behind him with its 18 names, the refuge that would operate in Rose Whitehawk's honor, the endowment that would fund it in perpetuity. This is not enough, he said clearly. Money does not equal justice. Acknowledgement does not resurrect the dead. But it's what I have to give. That and the rest of my life spent trying to be better than what I inherited. He stepped back from the podium. The press erupted with questions, shouted over each other, a cacophony of demands for more detail, more confession, more blood. But before James could respond, Caroline stepped forward to the microphone. Her voice was soft, but the sound system carried it clearly. My name is Caroline Donovan. I'm 16. I have cystic fibrosis because my great-great-grandfather thought uranium was more valuable than human life. I didn't know this until 2 years ago. When I learned it, I had to decide whether I was going to hate myself for existing, whether being alive was a betrayal of the people who died so my family could be rich. Tears streamed down her face, but her voice didn't waver. I decided that the best way to honor them was to live, to use whatever time I have to help build something better, to be part of creating refuge instead of causing more harm. So that's what I'm doing. I'm going to work with Miss Sullivan and the Lakota Nation to make the farmhouse into a place where broken people can heal. Because that's what my great-great-grandmother, Rose Whitehawk, did. And if a Lakota woman could spend 40 years creating sanctuary, then maybe a Donovan can spend whatever time she has helping that sanctuary continue. The question started again, but Mary Redbird stepped forward, her small frame commanding silence through sheer presence. She moved to the podium with the slow dignity of age and authority. I am Mary Redbird. My grandfather John was murdered on this spot 72 years ago. I was 10 years old enough to remember him, old enough to carry the loss my whole life. She looked at the cameras, at the reporters, at the machinery of public attention. James Donovan's confession changes nothing about the past. My grandfather is still dead. The 18 are still murdered. But it changes something about the future. She turned to look at Caroline. This child carries poison she didn't create. She's dying from her ancestors' crime. That makes her a victim too. Different kind of victim than my grandfather, but still. And I'll be damned if I let more children pay for old men's greed. Mary's voice grew stronger. The Lakota Nation accepts this land and this money. Not because it's enough, it will never be enough, but because we choose to build rather than just remember. We choose to create refuge rather than just mark graves. We choose the future over the past. She raised her hand, palm out in traditional gesture of peace and conclusion. The dead deserve to be remembered, but the living deserve to have a chance. We're going to give them that chance, on this land, in this place. Where genocide happened, healing will happen too. The press conference ended. The reporters dispersed to file their stories, to dissect every word, to create narratives of redemption or hypocrisy depending on their politics and their editors' demands. Kate watched them go, feeling exhausted and relieved and uncertain all at once. James stood near his car, Caroline beside him. They looked hollowed out, like they'd given pieces of themselves to the cameras and didn't know yet if they'd get anything back. Kate walked over. "You did good," she said. James shook his head. "I did what I should have done 30 years ago. That's not good. That's just less bad than continued silence." "Dad," Caroline's voice was gentle, "stop punishing yourself. Grandpa Richard did that enough for the whole family." "She's right," Kate said. "What happens now is up to you. You can spend whatever time you have left drowning in guilt, or you can spend it building something that makes the guilt worth carrying." "Building what, the refuge?" "That. And also just being a father, being present for Caroline, teaching her that people can change, can be better than what they inherited." Kate glanced at Grace, who was talking to Mary Redbird, both of them examining something Grace had drawn. "That's the legacy that matters. Not the money, not the confessions. Just showing the next generation that transformation is possible." James followed her gaze to Caroline and Grace, two girls connected by illness and history, and the strange alchemy that turned poison into medicine if you were willing to do the work. "I don't know how much time I have. The cancer's advancing. Doctor says maybe a year." "Then make it count," Kate said simply. "Make this year mean something Caroline can carry after you're gone." Over the following weeks, the story exploded across media. Opinion pieces argued about whether Donovan's confession was genuine or performative. Environmental groups celebrated the sealing of the uranium deposit. Mining industry publications condemned it. Conservative commentators claimed it was virtue signaling. Progressive outlets debated whether it was enough. But Kate stopped writing the coverage. She was too busy with the actual work of transformation. Architects consulted on how to convert the farmhouse into a refuge while maintaining its historical integrity. Lawyers drafted operating agreements between the tribal council, Kate, James, and the network of 63 people Rose had helped. Social workers designed intake procedures. Therapists volunteered time. Local builders offered labor. The refuge began to take shape not as an idea, but as a physical reality. The farmhouse got necessary repairs. The barn became a meeting space. The chicken coop, historical marker of where Rose had hidden evidence, was preserved as a reminder. And the storm cellar, Rose's archive, was converted into an education center where visitors could learn the full truth of 1952 and the 40 years of sanctuary that followed. Grace started school in Rapid City. Her asthma managed well enough that she rarely missed days. Caroline visited often, helping design the youth programs she'd promised Mary Redbird. The two girls became unlikely friends, bonded by illness and history, and the recognition that they were both paying prices they hadn't earned but could choose how to carry. 3 months after this press conference, Kate stood on the farmhouse porch at dawn watching the sun turn the Black Hills gold. Behind her, the refuge was taking its first residents. A young Lakota woman, 19, fleeing domestic violence with her infant son. An elder man, 70, whose house had burned and who had nowhere else to go. A teenage boy, 16, who'd been kicked out by his family for being gay. 3 people. The beginning of what Kate hoped would be hundreds over the coming years. 3 people finding sanctuary in the place Rose had guarded for 40 years. Frank joined her on the porch with coffee. "You did it. Built what Rose wanted." "We're building it," Kate corrected. "It's not done, might never be done. That's the nature of refuge. It's not a destination. It's a practice." Sounds like something Rose would say. "I've been reading her journals. She had a lot to say." Kate sipped the coffee, watching morning light spread across the land. "Frank, can I ask you something? Why did you stay all these years? Watching over Rose's property, helping me? You could have walked away at any point." Frank was quiet for a long moment. "Betty was Lakota, from Rosebud. When she died, I thought about leaving, going back east where I grew up. But then I realized this land, it held her memory, and Rose's vigil, it meant something. Someone needed to witness it, to remember that one person standing against evil matters, even if it takes 40 years to see the results." "You loved her, Rose. Not romantically, but yes, I loved her. The way you love someone who shows you what real courage looks like, who teaches you that principles aren't abstractions. They're things you live every day even when no one's watching." The sun cleared the hills fully. The day began its work of becoming. And somewhere in the farmhouse, 3 people woke in beds that were safe, in a place that remembered how to offer sanctuary, on land that had been poisoned and guarded and finally transformed into something better than what it had been. Kate thought about Rose, about 40 years of standing watch, about seeds planted in isolation that had grown into forests. She thought about James Donovan, using his last year to teach Caroline that redemption was possible, even if it came too late for the Redeemer. She thought about Mary Redbird choosing the future over the past, choosing healing over hatred, even while refusing to forget. And she thought about Grace asleep upstairs, breathing steady and unlabored, growing up in a place where history wasn't erased but transformed, where the next generation could learn that poison could become medicine if you were willing to do the hard work of transmutation. The refuge was open, the work had begun, and somewhere, Kate hoped, Rose was watching, finally able to rest after 40 years of vigil, knowing that the guardianship had passed to hands that would honor both the memory of the dead and the needs of the living. That was the legacy that mattered, not the money, not the monument, but the practice of creating refuge in a world that seemed designed to break the vulnerable. The practice of transformation, the practice of choosing, every day, to build rather than just remember, to heal rather than just hurt, to guard not just land, but people. That was what Rose had done, what Kate was learning to do, what Grace would carry forward into whatever future the world allowed her. The practice of being guardian, the practice of offering sanctuary, the practice of turning 40 years of standing watch into forests that would grow long after the watchers were gone. Winter came to the Black Hills the way it always did, sudden and absolute. One day the world was golden brown, the next it was white and silent, snow transforming the landscape into something that looked like the beginning of time. Kate stood at the farmhouse window watching flakes fall thick as feathers, thinking about how snow could bury or it could insulate, depending on what you needed it to do. Behind her, the refuge hummed with quiet activity. 23 people called it home now, some for a few weeks, others for months. The young Lakota woman and her infant son had stayed through autumn, saving money from the pay Frank had helped her find at the tribal school. The teenage boy had reconnected with his parents through slow, careful conversations mediated by the counselor who volunteered 3 days a week. The elder man had decided to stay permanently, trading maintenance work for room and board, his weathered hands finding purpose in fixing what was broken. Grace's footsteps on the stairs pulled Kate from her reverie. Her daughter was 9 now, taller, stronger. The asthma managed well enough that entire weeks passed without incident. She carried her school backpack and the ever-present sketch pad, her morning routine so established it needed no discussion. "Mom, Caroline texted. She wants to know if we can visit this weekend." Kate checked her phone. 3 months had passed since the press conference. And in that time, Caroline had become a fixture in their lives, spending weekends at the refuge, helping design programs, teaching Grace about debate techniques, and how to argue for what you believed in, even when your voice shook. Tell her yes, but remind her to pack warm. The snow's not stopping anytime soon. Grace's fingers flew across her phone screen. Then she looked up, her expression carrying the weight of a question she'd been holding. Is Mr. Donovan going to die soon? Kate had known this conversation was coming. Caroline had been honest with Grace about her father's cancer, about the prognosis that measured his remaining time in months rather than years. But knowing something and speaking it aloud were different countries. Probably, the doctors say he has maybe 6 months. Could be more, could be less. That's sad. Yes, it is. Grace pulled on her winter coat, the good one Kate had been able to afford now that money wasn't a daily crisis. But he's doing good things with the time he has. That makes it less sad, right? Kate knelt to help with the zipper that always stuck. I think it makes it sadder and better at the same time. Sad because he's running out of time just when he's figured out how to use it well. Better because at least he's not wasting what he has left. The school bus rumbled up the driveway, chains on its tires crunching through fresh snow. Grace hugged Kate hard, the kind of hug that said, I love you and I'm scared, and I understand more than you think I do, then ran out into the white morning. Kate watched until the bus disappeared, then turned back to the work that filled her days now. The refuge ran on a combination of the endowment James had established, donations from the network of people Rose had helped, and grants from organizations that supported indigenous communities and domestic violence survivors. Kate had quit looking for engineering jobs. This was her work now. Guardian, coordinator, the person who made sure that when someone arrived broken, they found a place to begin healing. Her phone rang. James. His calls had become less frequent as the cancer advanced, each conversation a little harder for him to sustain. Kate, his voice was thinner than 3 months ago. I need to ask a favor. Anything. I'm checking into hospice care next week. The pain's getting too difficult to manage at home, and I don't want Caroline to watch me deteriorate. But before I go, I want to see the refuge. Want to walk the land one more time. Would that be possible? Kate felt her throat tighten. Of course, when? Tomorrow? I know it's short notice, but I'm having what the doctors call a good day. I want to use it while I have it. They came in the afternoon, James moving slowly with a cane. Caroline beside him carrying the portable oxygen concentrator her father now needed for exertion. The snow had stopped, leaving the world crystalline and new. Kate met them at the porch, Frank beside her, both of them understanding without words that this was a kind of pilgrimage. James looked smaller than he had 3 months ago. The cancer had carved him down to essentials, taking flesh and leaving only the framework of who he'd been. But his eyes were clear, focused, taking in every detail of the farmhouse that had been restored, the barn that now hosted group meetings, the storm cellar marked with the plaque explaining Rose's 40-year archive. It's beautiful, he said, more than I imagined. Kate walked them through slowly, matching James's pace. She showed him the common room where residents gathered for meals, the counseling space where trauma got witnessed and held, the children's area where the infant son of the young Lakota woman now played while his mother worked. She showed him the memorial, 18 names carved in black stone, their stories told in panels that didn't flinch from the truth of how they died. James stood before his great-grandfather's name at the bottom of the memorial. Richard Donovan, architect of genocide. The panel didn't soften it, didn't contextualize it with explanations of Cold War pressures or government complicity. It simply stated what he'd done and what it had cost. Good, James said quietly. This is how it should be. Truth without excuse. Caroline had wandered to the oak tree, the ancient one that marked where the feast had happened, where 18 people had consumed poison thinking they were sharing community. She stood there breathing oxygen from the concentrator, one hand on the rough bark, and Kate saw her lips moving in what might have been prayer or conversation with ghosts. They sat on the porch as the sun began its winter descent, brief afternoon giving way to long evening. Frank brought coffee and the cookies one of the residents had baked that morning. An elder woman who said baking helped her remember she could still create sweet things even after years of bitterness. I'm glad I lived long enough to see this, James said. Glad I didn't die thinking all I'd leave behind was a mining company and a legacy of harm. You're leaving more than this refuge, Kate said. You're leaving Caroline, and you've taught her something important. What's that? That people can change. That you're not imprisoned by what you inherit. That redemption might not erase the past, but it can change the future. James was quiet for a long time watching his daughter at the oak tree. She's going to die young. The CF, it's progressive. Even with the best care, most people with her type don't make it past 30. I know. So I'm leaving her a short life in a body that fights against her. Some inheritance. Kate thought about Grace, about asthma attacks and medical bills, and the constant low-level terror of raising a chronically ill child. You're also leaving her this, proof that her life meant something, that she helped build refuge, that she turned her family's poison into someone else's medicine. That's an inheritance worth having, even if it's brief. You're kinder to me than I deserve. I'm not kind, I'm just realistic. You can't undo 72 years of your family profiting from genocide, but you stop pretending it didn't happen. That counts for something. Caroline returned from the oak tree, her face flushed from cold and something else. Clarity, maybe, or peace. She sat beside her father, leaning against him in the way of children who know their time with a parent is running out and want to memorize the feeling of being held. Dad, I've been thinking about what happens after. After what, sweetheart? After you die. Where I'll live, what I'll do. Carolyn looked at Kate. I want to live here at the refuge, help run it. I'm going to be 18 in 2 years, and I'll need somewhere to be while I finish high school. Somewhere that understands about medical equipment and bad days and the fact that I might not make it to graduation. James's hand tightened on his cane. Caroline, you should live with family. Your aunt in Denver, she's already offered. Aunt Michelle is nice, but she doesn't get it. She treats my CF like it's an inconvenience I'm inflicting on her. Here, people understand that bodies fail, that sometimes you need help breathing, and that doesn't make you weak or broken, just human. Kate felt the weight of what was being asked, taking in a terminally ill teenager, being responsible for her care, watching her decline the way James was declining now. It was an enormous commitment, one that would change everything about how the refuge operated. "I'll need to talk to the board," Kate said carefully, "and to your aunt, and to social services about what's legally required for guardianship. But if all that works out," Caroline's voice held desperate hope. Kate looked at this girl who carried her great-great-grandfather's crime in her DNA, who struggled for every breath but still showed up to help others, who'd stood in front of cameras and acknowledged her family's evil because she believed truth mattered more than comfort. "If all that works out, then yes, you can live here. Be part of this." Caroline's smile was incandescent despite the oxygen tube, despite the exhaustion that sat on her like a weight. She turned to her father. "See, I'll have somewhere good, somewhere that matters. You don't have to worry." But James was crying, tears streaming down his face that he made no effort to hide. "I wanted you to have more. College, career, a long life doing extraordinary things." "Dad, I am doing extraordinary things. I'm helping build refuge on land where my ancestor committed genocide. I'm turning poison into medicine. That's pretty extraordinary, even if it's in a short life." They stayed until twilight, James needing to rest before the drive back to Rapid City. Kate walked them to their car, Carolyn supporting her father now, roles reversed in the way they always eventually reversed between parents and children. "Kate," James gripped her hand with surprising strength. "Thank you for letting me be part of this, for not hating me. I never hated you. I just needed you to face what your family did. And you did. That's all anyone can ask. Will you come visit me in hospice? I'd like Caroline to see that we're friends, that the divide between our families doesn't have to be permanent." "I'll come, we'll come, Grace and me both." After they drove away, Kate stood in the snow watching their taillights disappear. Frank joined her, his presence solid and comforting in the gathering dark. "You're taking on a lot, agreeing to let Caroline live here." "I know. She's going to die. Probably while she's under your care. You'll have to watch it happen. Help Grace watch it happen." "I know that too." Frank was quiet then. "Rose would be proud of you, taking in the great-great-granddaughter of the man who caused all this pain, giving her sanctuary the same way Rose gave sanctuary to 63 others. Rose was braver than I am. She did it alone. You're not alone. You've got me, the network, the board, the whole community that's built up around this place." Frank put his arm around Kate's shoulders, brief and warm. "You're doing good work here, important work. Don't forget that on the hard days." The hard days came sooner than expected. James died 6 weeks later, his body finally surrendering to the cancer that had been eating him from the inside. The funeral was small, just Caroline and a few apex executives who'd stayed loyal despite the scandal. Kate and Grace attended, sitting in the back of the church, bearing witness to the end of a man who'd spent his last year trying to be better than his inheritance. Caroline spoke at the service. She was thin, her oxygen concentrator visible beneath the simple black dress, but her voice was steady. "My father spent most of his life carrying guilt for crimes he didn't commit. His great-grandfather murdered 18 people. His grandfather profited from it. His father knew about it and did nothing. And Dad inherited all of that weight without having a choice." She paused, gathering strength. "But he made a choice about what to do with that weight. He could have denied it, hidden it, pretended our family's money was clean. Instead, he faced it, acknowledged it, used his last year to build something better." Caroline looked directly at Kate and Grace. "He taught me that you're not defined by what you inherit. You're defined by what you do with it. And I'm going to spend whatever time I have doing what he did, transforming poison into medicine, building refuge instead of causing harm. That's the inheritance that matters." After the funeral, Carolyn moved into the refuge. Kate had prepared Rose's old room for her, the space that had witnessed 40 years of solitary vigil, now home to a dying teenager who refused to let death define her living. The refuge adapted. Nurses volunteered time to help with Caroline's care. Physical therapists designed exercises to maintain her lung function. The other residents, many dealing with their own trauma and struggle, found purpose in helping this girl who helped them. Grace and Caroline became sisters in everything but blood. They did homework together, Grace helping with math, Caroline helping with writing. They watched movies curled under blankets when Caroline's energy was low. They argued about music and politics and whether the universe was fundamentally good or fundamentally indifferent. And slowly, watching them, Kate understood something Rose had known. Refuge wasn't just about providing shelter. It was about creating family from the people who found their way to your door, about building connections that transcended blood and history and all the ways the world tried to separate people into categories of us and them. Spring came, then summer. The refuge expanded. They added a second building funded by a grant from an environmental foundation that saw the connection between protecting land and protecting people. They hired a full-time counselor and a part-time nurse. The network of 63 people Rose had helped grew to include their children and grandchildren, a whole community built on the foundation of one old woman's commitment to care. On Grace's 10th birthday, they held a celebration at the refuge. Residents made cake. Frank strung lights in the oak tree, transforming the site of genocide into something beautiful. Caroline, weaker now, but still present, gave Grace a journal. "For writing your own story," she said, "not the one you inherited, the one you choose." Grace hugged her carefully, mindful of the oxygen lines and the fragility that had become Caroline's constant companion. "Will you be here for my 11th birthday?" The question hung in the air, honest and terrible. Caroline's CF had progressed. Her lung function was declining. The doctors talked about months, maybe weeks. "I don't know," Caroline said, "but if I'm not, you'll remember me, right? You'll tell people about the girl who lived at the refuge and helped build something good?" "I'll remember, I promise." That night, after the party ended and the residents had drifted to their rooms, Kate found Caroline sitting on the porch, breathing hard despite the oxygen, looking at the stars that appeared one by one in the darkening sky. "Are you scared?" Kate asked, sitting beside her. "Of dying? Sometimes. Mostly I'm just sad I won't get to see how everything turns out. If the refuge keeps growing, if Grace becomes whatever extraordinary thing she's going to become, if the memorial teaches people something useful about not repeating the past." "You've already seen it start. That's more than most people get." Caroline was quiet for a long moment. "My dad, before he died, he told me something. He said I'd done more good in 16 years than he'd managed in 54. That I'd figured out faster than he did, that life isn't about how long you live, but about what you build while you're here." He was right. "I hope so, because if this is all the time I get, I want it to have mattered." "It mattered. It matters. You matter." Caroline leaned against Kate, the gesture of a daughter seeking comfort from a mother, roles they'd slipped into gradually until they fit like truth. "Thank you for letting me be part of this, for giving me somewhere to belong at the end." "This isn't the end. This is the middle of your story. The end comes later." But the end came in October, autumn turning the Black Hills into flame. Caroline died on a Tuesday morning, Grace holding one hand, Kate holding the other, her breathing finally quiet after years of struggle. She was 17. She'd lived at the refuge for 14 months. In that time, she'd helped 42 people find sanctuary, designed 3 youth programs, and taught an entire community that dying young didn't mean dying without purpose. They buried her next to the memorial, close to the oak tree. The headstone read simply, "Caroline Donovan, 2007 to 2024. She transformed poison into medicine." The grief was enormous. Grace struggled with nightmares, with sudden crying that came from nowhere, with the particular loneliness of losing someone who'd become essential. Kate struggled too, questioning whether she'd done right by Caroline, whether the refuge had been too much burden for a dying girl, whether she could have somehow changed the outcome. Frank, steady as stone, reminded her that Caroline had chosen this, had asked for it, had found meaning in it, that death was coming regardless. And what Kate had given was not burden, but purpose. "She died building something that will outlive her," Frank said. "How many people get that?" The refuge continued. It had to. More people came, drawn by word of mouth and desperation, and the knowledge that somewhere in the Black Hills was a place that understood about being broken. They came and they stayed and they healed, and eventually most of them left, carrying with them the memory of sanctuary and the understanding that refuge was possible, even in a world designed to break the vulnerable. Years passed. Grace turned 12, then 14, then 16. She grew tall and strong, her asthma fading to the point where she rarely needed medication. She joined the Tribal Youth Council like Mary Redbird had instructed, learning Lakota history and language, understanding what it meant to be both victim and beneficiary of American history. She volunteered at the refuge every weekend, helping newcomers settle in, teaching them the rhythms of the place. And in the quiet moments, she visited Caroline's grave, sat with her back against the oak tree, and told her about the people they'd helped, the programs they had expanded, the future they were building. On the 5th anniversary of Caroline's death, they held a ceremony. The memorial had grown. Now it included not just the 18 victims from 1952, but plaques for Rose Whitehawk and Caroline Donovan. Two women, generations apart, both who'd given their lives to guarding this land and the people who found their way to it. Mary Redbird, 95 now and bent with age but still fierce, spoke. When I was young, I thought justice meant revenge, meant making the people who hurt us suffer the way we suffered. But Rose taught me different. Caroline taught me different. They showed that justice is about building what should have been built in the first place. Refuge, safety, belonging. She gestured to the refuge, to the buildings that now house 60 people at various stages of healing. This is justice, not revenge, not punishment, but creation, the creation of sanctuary in a world that forgot how to offer it. After the ceremony, Kate walked the property alone, past the farmhouse where Rose had lived and worked and secretly helped 63 people over 40 years. Past the barn where residents now gathered for meetings and meals. Past the storm cellar where Rose's archive taught visitors about the cost of silence and the value of documentation. Past the gardens residents tended, growing food and flowers, and the kind of beauty that pushed back against despair. She ended at the oak tree, at the graves of Caroline and the memorial to the 18. 5 years since Caroline's death, 20 since Rose's, 72 since the murders that started all of this. And yet the refuge thrived, grew, continued the work of transformation that Rose had started alone and Kate had inherited and Carolyn had given her a brief life to sustaining. Grace found her there, 17 now and applying to colleges, looking more like her great-grandmother every year. She sat beside Kate in the grass, both of them looking at the names carved in stone. I got into Stanford, Grace said, full scholarship, environmental engineering. Kate felt pride and terror in equal measure. That's wonderful, it's also California. I know, and I thought about staying closer, going to University of South Dakota, being near the refuge. Grace pulled up grass with restless fingers. But then I remembered what you told me, Caroline said, about not being defined by what you inherit, but by what you do with it. What are you going to do with it? I'm going to learn everything I can about environmental restoration, about cleaning up contaminated sites, about transforming poisoned land into places where things can grow again. Grace looked at her mother. And then I'm coming back. I'm going to work with the tribal council to address all the uranium sites, not just ours, all of them. Every place where companies like Apex poison the land for profit. Kate saw the future in her daughter's fierce expression, saw Rose's determination and Caroline's purpose, and something new, something that belonged to Grace alone, the next generation's version of guardianship. Your great-grandmother would be proud. I hope so, because I'm doing this for her, for Caroline, for all the people who didn't get to see the poison cleaned up. Grace's voice was steady, certain. Someone has to be the guardian. Might as well be me. The sun was setting, turning the sky impossible colors. Kate and Grace sat together watching light fade and stars emerge. The same stars that had watched Rose stand vigil for 40 years. That had watched Caroline fight for breath and still find purpose. That would watch Grace do whatever extraordinary thing she was going to do with her inheritance. Mom, Grace said quietly, do you ever regret it, taking the inheritance, all the weight that came with it? Kate thought about the question, about eviction notices and medical bills and the desperate poverty that had defined her life before Rose's death, about the refuge and the hundreds of people it had helped, about Caroline dying at 17 but dying with purpose, about Grace growing into someone who saw problems and decided to fix them instead of just enduring them. No, she said, I don't regret it. It's hard, it's heavy, but it's also the most important thing I've ever done. Building this place, continuing Rose's work, giving you a foundation to build from. Even though Caroline died here, even though that hurt so much, especially because of that, because Caroline taught us that short lives can still be meaningful, that you don't have to live a long time to make a difference, that transformation is possible even when time is running out. They sat until full dark, mother and daughter, guardian and heir, wrapped in the silence that came after important things were said. Around them, the refuge settled into evening routines. Lights came on in windows. Residents prepared for sleep in beds that were safe, in a place that remembered how to offer sanctuary. And beneath it all, deep in the earth, uranium waited, still poisonous, still valuable, still guarded, not by one old woman standing watch alone anymore, but by a community that understood what that uranium had cost and was determined the price would not be paid again. That was the legacy Rose had built, that Kate had inherited, that Caroline had given her life to sustaining, that Grace would carry forward into whatever future the world allowed. The practice of guardianship, the practice of transformation, the practice of turning 40 years of standing watch into something that would outlive all of them. The practice of being refuge in a world that still broke the vulnerable. The practice of remembering that some inheritances aren't about what you receive, they're about what you do with what you've been given. How you transform poison into medicine. How you build sanctuary on ground that was poisoned. How you create family from the people who find their way to your door. Rose had understood that, had lived it for 40 years in isolation that turned out not to be isolation at all, but the planting of seeds that grew into forests. Kate understood it now, lived it daily in the work of running the refuge, of helping broken people heal, of teaching Grace that burden could become purpose if you were willing to carry it. And Grace was beginning to understand it, was choosing to understand it, was deciding that her inheritance wasn't just the refuge or the land or the story of what had happened here, but the responsibility to continue the work of transformation wherever poison needed to become medicine. That was the real legacy, not the money or the memorial or the refuge buildings, but the understanding that guardianship was a practice, not a destination. That you stood watch not because the watching was easy, but because someone had to. That you built sanctuary not because you knew you'd succeed, but because the alternative was letting the world stay broken. The stars wheeled overhead. The same stars that had watched genocide. The same stars that had watched Rose plant her seeds. The same stars that would watch Grace do whatever came next. And in the farmhouse, in the barn, in the buildings that housed the refuge, people slept safely. Some for the first time in years. Some for the first time in their lives. That was the point. That was the purpose. That was the inheritance worth having. The practice of being sanctuary. The practice of transformation. The practice of turning poison into medicine, one person at a time, one day at a time, until the forest Rose planted grew tall enough to shelter generations she would never meet. That was the guardian's gift. Not the land, not the money, but the understanding that love meant creating refuge, that justice meant building sanctuary, that legacy meant planting seeds that would grow long after the planter was gone. Rose understood it, Kate learned it, Caroline lived it, and Grace would carry it forward. The practice of guardianship, the practice of hope, the practice of believing that transformation was possible even when the poison ran deep and the time ran short and the world seemed designed to break everyone it touched. That was the story. That was the truth. That was the legacy. And it was enough.